Welcome back, everyone, to my channel, Fanfiction Podcasts. Today, we'll be continuing our exciting journey on What If Deku Was a Mischievous Supervillain Part 4. So before we continue, please like, share, subscribe, and comment in the comment section what you want next. Chapter Notes Issue 20, Interesting Events. See the end of the chapter for notes. Sumi sighed, glancing over at Aiba. Any luck with new recruits? Aiba shook her head. No luck. Most of these people aren't going to work with us. They either don't want to lose their reputation or they're too violent, or both. Sumi groaned, falling back on the couch. Ever since they'd had to deal with Teamy Dayton, the League of Supervillains had been considering taking on other members. However, Sumi's eyes shot open. Oh no. Her friend grinned. So, are you thinking about mistletoe already? Nope, not listening. Aiba tackled the much taller lady as she tried to leave. You're not denying it? With a huff, she pulled Aiba off of herself. Hey, Aiba, how about we talk about things other than my love life? The smaller villainess struggled in her grip. Come on, you have to tell him how you feel sincerely. Her expression turned more serious. Believe me, it'll only get worse until you do. Sumi stared, then sighed, putting her shorter friend back on her chair. I know. She'd had a lot more distracting fantasies of Mastermind taking that armor off to reveal a muscular physique. The villain was actually pretty strong as well as ridiculously smart. I'm just trying to find a good time to bring it up. Aiba shook her head. As a love expert, you've got to make a move sooner or later. Otherwise. The taller villain sighed. I know. She stared out the window, checking on Mastermind as he continued his routine. I'll tell him, all right? Soon. Aiba raised an eyebrow, but gave her friend a supportive grin. He'd have to be an idiot or gay to turn you down, Sumi. You got this. Timeline, 3 months, 2 weeks to exams, mid-November. Teishi Bushijima stared at the piece of paper in his hands, his insides twisted, spasming with the toxic load they held. Medical quirk usage permit, rejected. He looked back up at the secretary. I don't. What? I'm terribly sorry, Bushijima-san. The analysts and doctor have both confirmed that there is insufficient evidence to suggest your quirk is actively hazardous to your health. She gave him an insincere smile. Perhaps you should find a... This isn't a joke. He was aware that he was on his feet and shouting, but he didn't care. My quirk, I can feel it building up all the time. I need to. Please calm yourself, Bushijima-san. The plastic smile hadn't shifted. Your lack of control over your quirk is not enough justification for a medical exemption, if you need help with managing it. Takeshi took a deep breath. Through gritted teeth, he tried to make her understand. I can't manage it. My quirk constantly builds up. I've tried everything to try and control it, or stop the production. The decision is out of my hands, Bushijima-san. She gave him a cool look over her spectacles. Many others have claimed similar things. You are hardly special in that regard. He glared at her. He felt the gas inside him building up, screaming for release. As always, he kept it inside him. You're not listening to me. My quirk. It'll kill me if I can't release some of this gas. She slowly shook her head, speaking as if to a child. Bushijima-san, you're exaggerating. Besides, the doctor and analyst have examined your physiology and have determined that you will be fine. Takeshi stormed out of the office, a frustrated scowl on his face. Another sharp spasm of pain shot through him, causing him to stagger slightly. They'd mentioned that his stabs of pain were likely an act, as if he'd want to fake any of this. His quirk, poison gas, was unimaginatively named. All his quirk did was cause him to create a highly toxic compound. For anybody else, it would knock them out at least, potentially causing severe damage to people's lungs. While it was in his body, all it meant was chronic pain and dark gray splotches on his skin. He'd have to find somewhere to release the gas, somewhere isolated. He tugged his hoodie back up, putting his mask back in place. Furiously, he looked around, even as his body lurched. An alleyway not perfect, but at least there wouldn't be many people there. He managed to run into the alleyway, breathing heavily. The splotches of his quirk were growing, pushing to the surface of his hand. Gotta let it out, he mumbled. He stretched his hand out, and he felt the poison within him pour out, a thick bluish-gray fog. He sucked in a breath, the pain in his body receding. How ironic that when it left his body, It didn't hurt to breathe it. He hated that he had to release it here, but it was the best he could do. Shakili, Takeshi started to head for the edge of town. If he could just get out of Musu's Tafu. A loud boom interrupted his thoughts. He whirled around, hoping it wasn't somebody in a car who'd succumb to his quirk. If it was a hero, he'd have to run. When he saw it was a certain green and red figure, he started. Mastermind had been gaining a lot of traction as a villain. Takeshi mostly knew about him through internet memes and reposts. Stuff like, "Mwahaha, you've been masterminded," and videos of his exploits had been going around for a while. The guy may have been a clown, but he was still a villain. Takeshi's control of his quirk slipped with shock. The cloud of blue-gray mist shot out from him, despite him trying to regain control. Stay away from me." He tried to warn the short villain. Mastermind seemed surprised, then a small beep came from his visor. "Are you okay, random civilian? Not that I'm concerned at all, since I'm a devious evil genius and have just robbed a bank." He paused, no trace of his usual pomp in his voice. "Wait, is your quirk?" He started to walk closer to Takeshi, stance showing concern. Takeshi stared at him as he waded through the fog of his quirk, unfazed by it. Two other villains appeared, Mr. Warp and Gentle Criminal, the latter keeping his distance with a smaller mask pressed to his face. He barely noticed them. "My quirk, poison gas, it just keeps building up. If I don't release it, I'll die." Over a decade of frustration came pouring out of him. "But I can't, can I? They keep saying that I'm not approved for medical use of my quirk, and society doesn't allow us to use our quirks, so I have to keep it held back." He glared at Mastermind, another spike of pain shooting through him and tears starting in his eyes. "So before my own quirk kills me, I've got to let it out. Does that make me a villain? Huh? Not wanting to die?" He couldn't see Mastermind's face, the short villain seeming to think. Then he shook his head. "No, it doesn't." He turned to Mr. Warp and gestured towards Takeshi. Takeshi tried to run, but thick purple smoke washed over him. He felt a sharp impact on his back, a needle hitting him, then the world faded to black. The last thing he saw was the dim figure of Mastermind coming through the smoke. A short while later, when Takeshi woke up, it was in a dingy-looking office. "Where?" He sat up, only to be shoved back down with a gloved hand. The figure in front of him wore a lab coat and a light blue plastic filter over his mouth. Tired purple eyes looked him over. "Right, let's take a look at you. Sit down." He tried to push himself up, but a spike of pain came at that moment. The lab coat-wearing figure sighed, putting pressure on him. "Right, say ah!" When Takeshi didn't, the other person pulled out a tongue depressor and forcibly opened his mouth, examining the insides. Takeshi managed to push him off. "Who are you?" He got a flat glare in response. "Call me Stitch. Now I'm going to do some other checks. I want to know about your family members." He glared at the named Stitch. "Why would I tell? Your quirk is doing its level best to kill you." Stitch glared Takeshi down. "I got a sample of that gas and took a blood sample. Just from that, I can see that your quirk has built up to unhealthy levels. You were right to try and release it from your body at that point. Whatever doctors you were going to were negligent to the extreme. Now, family members?" Takeshi sucked in a breath, then let it out with a sigh. Stitch let out a sigh, frown clearing up. "Listen, I am a fully qualified doctor. I swore the Hippocratic Oath. Nothing about your family will leave this place. Do any other members of your family have similar quirks? How do they manage it?" Takeshi looked up. "Well, I've got some cousins on my father's side with similar quirks. My cousin's quirk's called gas, and it's very similar to mine. Kid's a jerk, though." Stitch hummed. "Do they have to regularly release the gas like you do?" Takeshi nodded. "My cousin's kind of got the opposite issue to me, though. His own gas is toxic to him outside his body, while mine isn't." The scraggly doctor looked up, obviously interested. "I don't have as much here as I would like to. I'd really love to have an X-ray so I could confirm." Mastermind burst in, some sort of contraption in hand. "It's ready," Stitch glared at the shorter villain. "Get the hell out of my office. The patient needs actual treatment." Mastermind ignored Stitch, coming over to Takeshi. "Now, this is just a crude mock-up, but it should work." Takeshi looked at the melodramatic villain as he attached some sort of device to his arm, a gauntlet with a large nozzle on top. the bracer extending a short way down his forearm. The whole thing looked like a high-tech stovetop burner had been attached to his arm. Mastermind's head snapped over to meet his gaze. Right, so when we met, you were emitting your quirk from your hands, right? Does it emit anywhere else? Highly unlikely, considering that the vast majority of emitter quirks are attached to. Takshi felt like he was drowning in a sea of words as the villain chattered. From my hands, yes, Mastermind nodded, already forcing the second gauntlet on Takeshi. Good, now tap the palm of the gauntlet, middle 2 fingers, please. Takeshi looked at him warily. Why? Mastermind patted him on the shoulder. That will ignite the pilot light. At Takeshi's alarmed expression, he explained. See, this glove here's airtight, so your quirk will have to funnel through to here. I did a bit of testing, and I found that your gas is extremely inflammable and leaves no other toxic byproducts when burnt. So try it out. You are not lighting a flamethrower in my office. Stitch glared at Takeshi as if he was the one at fault. Takeshi didn't notice, as he was busy staring at Mastermind. The weight of the gauntlets on his arms just added to the strangeness of the situation. Why are you doing this? Mastermind seemed stunned. It's because I think I can recruit you as a minion. That's it, no other reason. He nodded to Stitch. Once you're done, could you take him into the lot? I want to make sure that these gauntlets work properly. Stitch sighed deeply, pointing to the door. Get out of my office. As Mastermind left, Takeshi looked at Stitch, the doctor pulling out other pieces of equipment. Now, do you have any allergies? Why did he just give me these? Stitch shrugged. Don't know. I think he just thought your quirk was interesting. He really loves quirks. Takeshi stared at the doctor before looking down. I've got a minor allergy to peanuts, if that helps. The doctor looked at him, then to the gauntlet. Turn that pilot light off before you set my whole office on fire. Shakili, Takeshi did so. One short consultation later, Stitch recommending some drugs based on initial data that might help with mitigating his quirk, and he was dragged outside to a vacant lot, Mastermind watching closely. Good. Now, let's get to testing. I want these gauntlet to be safe. Takeshi stared at Mastermind. Why are you doing this? Mastermind stared at him. Well, mostly I wanted to test drive a flamethrower design. I mean, why? Takeshi flapped his hands in the air, trying to put words to what he was feeling. He struggled, going for just why? Why care about some guy in an alleyway? Mastermind seemed to drop out of the persona. Because you look like you needed help. Those didn't seem to be the words he wanted to choose. Just kidding. I want you as a minion, and I decided to bribe you with these. That's the only reason. He slapped Takeshi on the back. Now try them out. Takeshi numbly pointed his arm, tapping the palms. A click sounded in the gauntlets, a light on the side flashing. Mastermind gave him a thumbs up, checking a screen in his hand. Now, use your quirk. Numbly, Takeshi did so. A flare of blue, focused flames came out, like a kitchen burner, only much larger, shooting out across the yard. Mastermind cheered, checking other things on his screen. It looks like there's no residual gas leakage as well. How do you feel? Takeshi blinked, stunned as the fire raged. Better, he managed. A grin crossed his face as he poured more gas out, watching as it burnt up in the flames. A few more tests later, and Takeshi was once again surrounded by purple smoke. When he was aware of things again, he was back in that alleyway, a small piece of paper in his hand. Let me know if you want to be a member of the League of Supervillains. Consider the gloves a gift. Call me if there's any issues with the gear. Crack-a-thoom. Takeshi staggered back to his shitty apartment. He felt healthier than he had in years. He was wearing a pair of gauntlets given to him by a literal villain who wrote out his maniacal laughter and sound effects, and he had said villain's phone number. The piece of paper was stuck in his meager contacts book. Maybe he should throw it out. But for all that they were villains, at least they'd given a damn about him. Timeline: 3 months to exams. Jinbu Baigawara stared out at the gray sky, cigarette dangling loosely in his fingers. Another dull day, coming up to a new year in his latest shitty motel room. His stomach grumbled. I should get something. Kind of feel like ramen. I want Courage. He staggered, clutching his head as he felt himself want to split. Come on, I just want to get lunch. Not hungry, don't really want anything. He searched the fridge in the shitty motel he was living in, trying to find something halfway edible. Last time he'd tried to order takeout, he'd gotten into an argument with himself over the phone, and he'd had to leave that motel pretty quickly after that. His search turned up with no results. With a frustrated groan, he pushed himself over to the paper bag. At least with that on his head, he wasn't in immediate danger of splitting. He tried to smile at himself. Today's going to be better. No, it won't. It'll suck. The sad thing was, he wasn't sure which of him had said what. Mount Lady had been a hero for about 8 months at this point. Most of that time had been devoted to dealing with a certain maniacally laughing villain. It was honestly hard to decide which was more frustrating. Dealing with Mastermind was weird, but at least it wasn't stepping on people to stay in the red. It wasn't as if the idiot was the only villain she'd fought. She'd helped with a lot of villains with gigantification quirks as well. Even some villains who didn't grow huge. It just seemed that her career was going to be defined mostly by a certain giggling lunatic. The only good thing you could say was that he was as harmless as a villain could be, no deaths to his name. Considering some other villains in the past and present, that was a blessing. Combined with their Phantom Thief routine, and it meant that most heroes didn't go out of their way to track them down. They'd heard a few things from the police that the League of Supervillains had been seen in force. Apparently, they'd been setting something up in a poorer neighborhood in Musutafu. Kamai Woods and her had gone out to see what the problem was. It was a pretty simple affair, an empty lot that had been fitted with several tables and benches. A large table with Mastermind and the rest of the League of Supervillains behind it was piled with bowls and a large vat of what looked like ramen on a portable stovetop. The crowner had to be the banner above them, clearly set up to advertise exactly what they were dealing with. Evil Soup Kitchen. A small group of robot spiders were putting what looked like heaters in strategic spots. The place had a small gathering of people down on their luck, gratefully accepting bowls and sitting down to get out of the cold. Mount Lady could feel a headache coming on. So, what makes this an evil soup kitchen? Nefarious villain. Miss Joke's idea of dealing with Mastermind had been to continuously spout those kinds of lines. It worked, but Mount Lady could feel her credibility going with every sentence. It had gotten to the point where people were expecting her to say these cheesy lines in hero work, even when Mastermind wasn't involved. Mastermind giggled. It's an evil soup kitchen because we haven't registered as a non-profit group with Musutafu Council. He put a hand to his mouth to stifle his giggles before pouring a bowl of ramen for a customer. Here you go. Remember to stay warm. Kamui Woods and Mount Lady traded a look. The League of Supervillains were actual criminals, so they should be arresting them right now. On the other hand, apparently the group wasn't doing anything villainous. Nobody who had eaten here showed signs of poisoning. Plus, taking down a soup kitchen in winter didn't exactly feel right. A plan of action presented itself. It was unorthodox, but that was just dealing with Mastermind. Right. Mount Lady turned back to the League of Villains. Well, villain, we are going to put a stop to your nefarious ways, once and for all. Then she sighed, pinching her eyes in frustration. Maybe she should have stayed in Hokkaido after all. At least there she'd had some respect, even if it was just lifting cows out of ditches. Oh, how so, heroes? Kamui Woods stepped up to the plate, the plan apparent. We're going to get the paperwork through to make this an approved non-profit venture. That's how! Mastermind staggered back. You wouldn't, Mount Lady grinned. Not just that, but one of us is going to stay here to help while we do that. Mastermind seemed to grin. So you are interested in taking over the entire Musutafu prefecture. I knew it. If we joined forces, no way in hell. We're just going to stay here so that we can subvert your wickedness, Mount Lady explained. She glared at Kamui. Kamui, you could leave and I stay here to keep an eye on them. Kamui Woods glanced at her before giving a short nod. Be careful. Mount Lady smiled back. It's all right. I mean, what could possibly happen? Jin had managed to get out of his motel room and out of the house without coming across as creepy. Great. Terrible. Now it was just a matter of getting some food. People gave him odd looks as he walked along, trying his hardest to avoid pulling his paper bag on. Jiran had said that he was getting him a costume that would help stop him splitting apart. Jiran's words seemed to play themselves on repeat. What's a guy with nothing left supposed to do? Find people who will trust you, friends, allies. Jiran offered Jin a cigarette. There's a certain gang that's been making some noise lately. Very fun people. I'm sure they could use a guy like you. Jin had taken the cigarette as Jiran kept talking. Don't worry, there are plenty of others like you, more than you think. Jiran had apparently been making calls about getting him a proper outfit, some sort of Christmas gift or something. Jin honestly didn't care, as long as he was covered up. He sniffed the air. Smells good. Shit's rank, yo. His stomach growled. He may have been at war with himself, but he was still hungry. With a determined expression on his face, he followed his nose. It took him a short time before he stopped and stared at the formerly empty lot. What the hell? This ain't surprising. Well, at least he'd get food. He got in the short line, the spell of ramen getting stronger as he came closer. The figure at the soup pot he recognized. Mastermind? That guy had been making waves in the villain world, though they probably weren't the waves most people would want. Apparently, Jiran wanted him to work with the guy. He wasn't sure about it. He was completely on board 100%. He stumbled, clutching his head. A hard, metallic hand caught his arm. Are you okay? Blinking, he saw that Mastermind had apparently leapt over the table to catch him. I'm okay. No, I ain't. Mastermind tilted his head. All right, if you say so. Gently, he directed Jin to a seat. Are you hungry? Jin's stomach growled, Mastermind seeming to take it as confirmation. Right, just wait here for a second. Jin watched him leave, mouth slightly agape as Mastermind poured a bowl of ramen, the noodles freshly shaken. The steaming smell of pork ramen hit his nostrils, Mastermind putting it in front of him. Here, you look like you need it. Jin was aware that his eyes were tearing up, but he didn't care. He ate his ramen in silence, not trusting himself to speak lest he split. That done, he hurried away, pulling out his phone and dialing the only other number there. Within a few rings, the man on the other end picked up. Bubai Gara, how have you been? Jin leaned against a wall. I've been pretty good. I feel like shit. Grunting in frustration, Jin gripped the phone tightly. So who did you say was up and coming again? A few days later, he'd only had the mask available, but that was enough. In Jiran's poky little office, Mastermind was a polite presence. The name's Twice. Don't you forget it. Screw you. Mastermind tilted his head. I think we met at the evil soup kitchen? Twice gave him a thumbs up. You got it, boss. Timeline, 3 months to exam, December, chapter end notes. AN, wow, this one was surprisingly difficult. I had some scenes in my head for months. Technically, Jin snapped later in canon, but different timeline, differences all around. Also, we have Takeshi Bushijima from Team Up. Yay. I really wanted to get one scene, but for the life of me it did not fit. It'll come later. Next time, the League sorts some stuff out, and we might even get to the entrance exam. Please comment. It sustains me in these dark times. Chapter Notes, Issue 21, Facecam Reveal. See the end of the chapter for notes. Welcome to our evil lair. Trademark. Mastermind cheerfully gestured to Twice to follow them into Gentle Criminal's apartment. Gentle Criminal bowed deeply. Please, welcome. I'll get us some tea. Sounds lovely. Miss me with that hot leaf water. Gentle Criminal paused, then shrugged, gesturing to the living room. I've got the heater, Mastermind, built in here. It will definitely help us tolerate the freezing winter. Twice fidgeted with his mask. Mastermind grinned. Well, you wanted to join us, right? So we're going to do some pre-Christmas stuff together. My mom was interested in meeting some of my co-workers for the family and friends thing we have, but I haven't told her you guys are actually villains, and... Golden Grin perked up. Oh, she made that really nice cake, didn't she? Mastermind twitched. Well, yeah? She thought it would be nice to treat my co-workers to something. I've sort of told her that it was a coffee shop job, and she may be a bit worried. Inkblot looped an arm around Mastermind's shoulders. Come on, dude. We can pretend to be work friends or something. Then she seemed to think better of it, pulling her arm back like Mastermind had turned on his taser. If you want to. You know. Mastermind tilted his head. Trying to shake himself, he gestured to a different room where several items could be seen. Well, anyways, this is my backup lab. I've got the big one at home. I've got a couple of projects developing. Twice looked at the gear. Wow, he breathed. I've seen better. The other villains traded a glance before deciding to go with it. Twice's problem seemed somewhat manageable at least. The villain pointed at the large item in the middle of the room, what looked like a ray gun the size of a fridge. Kind of curious, but what's that? Mastermind glanced at it. Oh, that's the Quirk erasure ray. Still working on getting it to work. Gentle Criminal and La Brava sighed as Twice choked on nothing. They remembered when Mastermind had initially brought it up. About a month and a half ago, the League of Supervillains stared at Mastermind as if he'd grown a second head. Gentle Criminal was the first to speak, sounding rattled. You figured out how to replicate erasure? Mastermind nodded. They could hear the manic grin in his voice. Yep, really cool, huh? He held up the small screen, displaying a squiggly line proudly. La Brava was the first one to speak. But how? Mastermind grinned. An easy explanation, fellow villains. With a booming laugh and a crack of thunder, he dramatically swept his cloak to gesture at a screen. Gentle had spent quite a bit of time coaching the younger villain on how to do that. Much earlier, I faced off against Eraserhead. In that time, my visor's scanner picked up that Eraserhead was emitting a specific energy, an energy that must have been trying to suppress the quirk I do not possess. He clenched a fist. Unfortunately, I needed more time to properly examine his energy signature. Way more time. Golden Grin looked confused. So how did you build this thing then? You remember back at the mall, where we clashed with Eraserhead? With their hesitant nods, he pointed at the screen. First of all, I was seeing the energy-suppressing Mr. Compress's quirk and La Brava's at close hand. Got a lot of practical information from that. While I was in close contact with him, I took the opportunity to smear a tracking chemical on his clothing. To demonstrate, he tapped his gauntlet. A small hatch opened, revealing a stamp plate with an M engraved on it. The substance coating it glowed a dull green. A tracking chemical? How does that work? Mastermind gave Mr. Compress a dramatic wave of his cloak. It emits a harmless radiation that I can track remotely. From there, I tracked him back to the Naruhata ward. I think he has a base there. He tapped the screen. From there, it was a simple matter of deploying scanners in the most likely areas for heroic conflict, and bam, I was getting a whole bunch of data. I only got the full scan of Erasure's energy signature a couple of days ago. The villains were silent for a bit, each thinking about this new development. So, we can erase hero quirks, Inkblot breathed. That's a game changer. Mastermind shook his head. Oh, God no. This will need months of work before I deploy it against heroes. That surprised the villains. But I thought you said that you had erasure? Inkblot managed to get out. Again, he sadly shook his head. I have his energy frequency. I'd need to get my energy modulator to put that frequency out. I'd also need to make sure that the energy projected is non-hazardous. I don't want to accidentally give heroes brain damage or cancer. That sobered the villains up quickly. That sounds like a good idea, Mastermind, Gentle Criminal muttered. Mastermind patted it appreciatively. I'm getting closer to replicating the energy signature, but it's a ways off yet. Twice seemed to stare at his new boss. That's pretty incredible. Wish I knew what that even meant. Mastermind cheerfully bounded over. Basically, a lot of emitter quirks have to do with some form of energy. Usually, it's just a matter of examining the frequency. There's another project that took a lot of effort to realize. He nodded over to a diagram of a much larger, more complete-looking ray gun. But that's for a rainy day. Twice seemed a bit overwhelmed as he took in the sketches and half-finished pieces. Have to say that's all pretty good, but maybe later? Tell me now, science man. Normally, Mastermind was good at keeping his obsession with technology at a minimum. However, permission had been granted. Say no more, Twice. He started to rattle off a stream of enthusiastic jargon, the poor man barely staying afloat. Various pieces were taken off, Twice trying to find a way out. Fortunately, he was tossed a lifeline. Gentle Criminal delicately coughed. As enlightening as demonstrating your technology is for our newest team member, maybe he would appreciate some tea? Mastermind paused his stream of dialogue, then nodded. All right, we can talk about support gear later. Twice mouthed a silent thank you to Gentle Criminal, who gave him a short nod in return. Gentle had laid out a small number of sweets to go with his preferred tea. As the League of Supervillains' fortunes had increased, so too had the general quality of his tea. As they sat down, Gentle Criminal frowned at an unexpected addition to the table. "Who brought champagne?" Inkblot grinned, already putting another bottle and some glasses on the table. "Guilty." She looked at the other members of the League. "What?" Mr. Compress coughed tactfully. "Should we really be drinking in the afternoon like this?" He got a hard, flat stare from the feline villain. "It's a party. Come on, it's good quality stuff as well." Stitch smiled, eyes creasing behind his mask. "I have to agree. Let's have a nice drink." He'd already poured himself a glass, already waiting to take a sip. Mastermind looked at the rest of the group. "I, don't really drink." "You don't?" Inkblot looked at Mastermind quizzically, then shrugged. "Well, that leaves more for the rest of us then." Gentle sighed. "Very well. Let's have some tea first. Give the champagne a welcoming friend." The League of Supervillains raised their delicate cups, the warm brew within sloshing around. "To our newest member, Twice." Twice flushed brightly enough to be seen through his costume. "Aw, you guys, I'll murder ya in your sleep." The other villains stared at him for a few seconds, then shrugged, having gotten used to his sudden outbursts. "So Twice, I'd like to hear more about your quirk." Mastermind leaned in closer. "If you don't mind, that is." His notebook and pen were already in hand. Twice looked at the supervillain for a couple of seconds, pulling his mask back down. "Jiren didn't tell you?" Mastermind shook his head. "He told me that. You were somebody who needed friends, and besides, it's much more interesting to talk to somebody about their quirk than to hear a second-hand account." Twice took a deep breath, then took a more confident stance. "Well, my quirk's called Double. I can produce 2 copies of anything, living or dead. Why, the copies I create are so good that they can even use their quirk." Mastermind stared at him admiringly. Already he'd filled an entire page with notes on possible uses based on his initial impressions. "That's incredible. Twice. A quirk like that is simply amazing. So what are the limits?" Twice had a confident smile on his face. "Well, first of all, I can only provide 2 copies, period, not 2 copies of anything. Secondly, the copies are much less durable than the original. An injury about as potent as a broken bone would be enough to dispel the copy." The smile slipped off his face. He stared at some horrible scene only he could see. "Believe me, I know." Mastermind gently patted him on the shoulder. "I'm sorry to have brought it up Twice. I wouldn't have asked if." "It's okay, I'm fine. Everything sucks." Mastermind looked at him with concern. "If you're sure." He picked his cup of tea back up. Twice shook himself. "Today's a good day. Where was I? Oh, yes." He pulled out a pair of measuring tapes from his wrist bracers. "The other thing is, I need to know the exact details of what I'm copying. Height, weight, hairstyle, facial features, age." Mastermind nearly choked on his tea. Coughing, he managed to wipe his mouth clean. "Age? Really?" Twice nodded. "Yep, it's not the most important detail, but it's a factor." He looked at Mastermind with a raised eyebrow, the other villains also curious. "Is that a problem? It better not be." Mastermind froze slightly. Just for a second, then he was back on track. "It's not a problem." Mastermind laughed it off. "I've just never seen a quirk with an age restriction." His pen resumed its blur, hastily copying this information down. "I've been so worried about keeping my age under wraps. It's why I'm careful leaving. I always make sure that I'm safely away somewhere else before I remove my costume and head home. I mean, it's not as if I don't trust my friends with my age. That would be silly. It's just, I like having the barrier of my suit. With the suit on, I'm Mastermind, a super villain, the villain that the heroes need and deserve. Out of the suit, I'm just Midoriya Izuku, giant hero nerd and tinkerer, quirkless, useless. I knew that my friends would support me. They had to. We'd been through so much. But I guess I was afraid that they'd just send me back to being quirkless Izuku. I didn't want them to do that. So as long as I could, I was going to keep Izuku out of my life for the plan to work. I didn't want to keep lying to my friends, but was it really lying if nobody directly asked me how old I was? The party had been going for a short time. After the tea and cake, the other villains were entertaining themselves with various means. mostly making small talk, talking about the holidays and what they held. Stitch had flopped onto the couch, napping. Labrava looked at Inkblot slightly disapprovingly. "How much champagne have you had?" Inkblot shrugged. "Not much. Come on, I've got great tolerance." The shorter villain gave her friend a look. Uh-huh. Her feline friend grabbed the bottle, pouring herself another glass with a slightly shaky hand. "Come on, it's Dutch courage. Just one more." Labrava took the bottle away from her friend. "I'll give it back if you tell him," she coyly suggested. Inkblot glared at her friend, then sighed. "Fine, you win, and you're probably right. I've got to ask before somebody else does." Mastermind was chattering away to Mr. Compress, excitedly mentioning the possibilities of Twice's quirk in conjunction with his own. Labrava gave her friend a smile. "The worst that can happen is he says no." Inkblot groaned in despair. "Thanks for the reminder, Iba," she groused. The shorter villain only grinned at her taller friend. "Go for it." She sneakily reached into her pocket, pulling out a small bunch of mistletoe. "In case you need it." Inkblot slammed her glass of champagne back, gripping the small bunch of mistletoe. Inkblot found Mastermind cheerfully chattering to Twice. "So what happens to a copy if they change out of their clothes? Can you make inanimate objects based solely on a description, or do you need to see the item itself?" Twice looked like he was a bit overwhelmed by all the questions. Inkblot steeled herself. "Well, all I have to do is ask him out. No biggie. Surely he's gotten the hint by now? Hey." Twice looked up. "Hey, Inkblot, want to join in? Fuck off and die." Twice slapped his mouth. "I'm sorry, I'm just going to go over here." He darted off. Mastermind turned to her, and what she was about to say next left her mind. She pushed on anyway. "Well, she trailed off. He turned a bit to focus on her. "Is something wrong? Just say it, Inkblot. I'm not in goddamn high school anymore." She took a deep breath. "I like you a lot." Mastermind seemed to beam. "I like you too, Inkblot, Sumi-san." Hearing her name used so familiarly caused the masked butterflies in her stomach to multiply. "Oh, really? You like me?" The other villain looked at her oddly. The rest of the league seemed to have disappeared. "Well, of course I do. You've been a great friend, and I'm not so embarrassed by the banter." A lead weight sunk into her stomach. Did he not pick up on it? "Wait. Banter?" Mastermind nodded, oblivious to the feelings in her head. "Yeah, you flirting with me like that. It's just banter, right?" Inkblot wanted to slap a hand to her face or get another drink. She settled for staring at her boss, amazed that somebody so smart hadn't figured out that she was actually interested in him. Then again, if he'd grown up quirkless, maybe he wasn't used to that kind of positive attention. As Mastermind took another sip of tea, Sumi cast a helpless glance out to Labrava. The shorter lady, perched on the countertop, made frantic gestures to keep talking. "Well, I really like you." She took a deep breath. "You're kind and smart, and you don't actually seem to care about me being all." She waved her hands, trying to convey the typical standard she dealt with. "I really want to go out with you, is what I'm saying." Mastermind froze in place. All right?" he squeaked out. Then he seemed to remember himself, hastily pulling his mouthpiece back on. I mean, what? Really? That's, a bit too late." Sumi's eyes widened. She was sure that Mr. Compress had choked on his sip of tea. Stitch sat up, eyes focused on the drama happening behind him. Labrava was looking at her friend with concern, the same thought obviously having just struck her. Oh no. With a sinking feeling in her stomach, Sumi looked closer at Mastermind, really looked at him. The villain was short. That could be put on his natural adult height, but there was something about his build, even through the armor, that suggested he wasn't an adult. A few other things clicked. How Mastermind wasn't available during normal hours, that he lived with his mother, his general awkwardness, and that latest high-pitched squeak. She was aware that the room had frozen with that outburst, but she had to ask. "Mastermind, please, tell me you're an adult." If the room hadn't been tense before, it was now as the other villains looked at the pair of them. Gentle Criminal and Labrava were looking between each other and her. Twice seemed uneasy, Mr. Compress having swapped his mask for one that had a raised eyebrow design on it. Golden Grin had sat up properly, face serious. Mastermind stayed clutched, then he slumped, sighing. "I guess I had to take my helmet off sometime." He tapped some panels on the side of his mask, the seals hissing and clicking. The mouthpiece came off first, followed by the upper visor. Sumi stared at Mastermind's face. A mass of dark green fluffy hair, brilliant green eyes, freckles on slightly chubby cheeks. He winced, looking away from her. Well, I'm not. I'm just leaving middle school. He put on a wobbly smile. Inkblot managed to find her voice, low and quivering. Oh my God, you're a teenager. Visions danced in her head of the thoughts she'd had about Mastermind. The teenager's face superimposed itself on a particularly intimate thought involving rather a lot of oil. She was able to make it to the toilet before she threw up. Gentle Criminal simply stood there, Mastermind looking just as stunned as he felt. Mastermind, a teenager. He really hadn't thought about it. The shorter villain stood up. You probably don't like that I lied, huh? When nobody responded, he slowly stood up. I'm sorry for bothering you. I'll just leave now. Gentle felt a dark pit opening in his stomach with those words. Was Mastermind? The other villains looked at each other uneasily. Why are you leaving? Mastermind looked up. Well, I mean, it's late, and maybe me being a villain was stupid. With a quick switch of his mask to a worried face, Mr. Compress stood up. I must admit this is a surprise. But it's fine, it's fine. Mastermind put on a shaky smile. It might be better if I just stop the villainy thing. Focus on something realistic. You don't have to put up with me and my dumb plans anymore. Labrava's face crumpled. You really want to leave? Mastermind winced in turn, already turning to grab his bag. Well, who'd want a quirkless teenager around? It's fine. It's fine. Gentle Criminal could see Mastermind's smile turning steadily more plastic. He'd seen those eyes in the mirror before. Mastermind, and if you guys need any gear upgrades, you can just call me. I'll get it done. Mastermind. Who was I kidding? This was a mistake. Mastermind! Midoriya Izuku stared at Gentle with his mouth open. Gentle Criminal had shouted. Gentle Criminal had shouted? The older man took a deep breath. Apologies, Mastermind. He sighed. This won't be easy to say. Izuku looked at Gentle as he continued to talk, slowly and carefully. I won't deny that. If you had told me after the robbery that you were a minor, I would have probably advised you to stop. Being a villain is a hard life, and you've got your whole life ahead of you. Izuku's heart tightened. So it's fine. I'll just leave now. Gentle Criminal held up a hand. Young man, Mastermind. That was then, this is now. What I mean is that, time and again, I have seen you in action. Izuku was aware that there were tears in the corners of his eyes. You don't have to sugarcoat it. Golden Grin piped up. You've built all of this gear when you're not even in high school? You're frickin' awesome. Mr. Compress chimed in. You managed to get away from actual pro heroes, young man. Most villains can't claim that. Mastermind seemed to shrink in on himself. You don't have to be so nice about it. It's all right. I'm not going to be hurt. Labrava stepped closer, concern on her face. You're clearly not okay. Believe me, I know what it's like to be pushed away. Gentle Criminal stepped closer to his young fan. As do I. Mastermind looked at him with wide eyes as he continued. I can't deny that I'm offended that you never told us how old you really were, but I get why you hid your age from us. But Mastermind, whoever you are. Mastermind's eyes were brimming with tears. Midoriya Izuku, he choked out. Gentle Criminal and Mr. Compress traded a look. Midoriya-kun. He smiled at his young fan, feeling like history had repeated itself ever so slightly. Just like with Manami before him, this young man needed help. What I'm trying to say is that we want you to stay. Izuku stared at his idol, open-mouthed. The other villains in the room grinned, looking at Mastermind with surprising smiles. Golden Grin, with a smile as wide as his namesake. You helped me ace my midterms, man. Of course I want you to stay. Labrava's own smile was a bit teary, but she was still determined. Remember when I said you were my first real friend? That didn't just change, you know. Mr. Compress chuckled. I believe there is still some prestidigitation I can teach you, young man. Twice gave him a big thumbs up. Look, you treated me nicely before, and I want to help you with your villain thing. You ain't getting rid of me, even if you want to. Stitch rubbed the back of his head, scowling. You're a bit infuriating, but I can respect the expertise behind your technology. It's only logical for you to stay here with your creations. He knew that he would have to talk with them. He needed to make a lot of apologies for keeping himself secret while learning about each of them. But in the moment, that just didn't seem to matter. Izuku stared at the rest of the villains. There were tears coming from his eyes, and he had sunk to his knees as the knot of emotions in his chest unraveled. For a few seconds, he just sat there as the villains simply looked on. No words were said. Then La Brava Izuku. Izuku looked up, managing to up. La Brava looked at him with a sad expression of her own. His mind ran quickly. Inkblot, he breathed. He pushed himself upright, but La Brava held up a hand. You should probably leave her, she said. Izuku stared at the doorway, then back to La Brava. La Brava simply shook her head. That was a bit of a shock. I don't think she's angry per se, but I'll talk to her tomorrow. For a second, Izuku thought of running after her. Then he saw Gentle Criminal and Mr. Compress shaking their heads. I guess I should work on my apology, shouldn't I? Stitch pulled his mask down so that he could leer at Izuku properly. You sure do, kid. Maybe you should buy her some flowers or something. It was a couple of days later. La Brava had called Inkblot and had managed to help get a meeting. She'd managed to stress that Izuku had genuinely been unaware that she'd been flirting with him properly. Sumi was sitting across from Mastermind, Midoriya. The other villains had decided to leave the room. She looked him in the eye, then sighed. Trust Mastermind to be cute. Like a puppy. Midoriya sighed. I'm really sorry for hurting you like this. Sumi gave him a pained smile. I know, you didn't do it on purpose, didn't make it feel any less humiliating, or make her feel less depressed with herself. You didn't need to do something on purpose to hurt other people. She knew that. Midoriya stared at his hands. So, why would you even like me like that? Sumi whipped her head back up from where she'd been looking at the ground. What? You're smart, kind? You've got muscle. I don't get why you don't have more people interested. Midoriya shrugged. Most of the people in school think the mumbling is weird. I'm still a massive nerd. Sumi gave him with an odd look. Right. With Midoriya looking even more miserable, Sumi pinched her eyes shut in frustration. How did you go on with this kind of thing? Midoriya was the one to break that silence. Things aren't going to be the same, are they? Sumi twisted the hem of her jacket. Probably not. Looking at the kid, she managed to suck in a breath. Look, as Midoriya turned, she gathered her thoughts. Sure, this whole reveal sucked, but at least we figured it out like this, rather than having to find out who you are by pulling your helmet off your body. Midoriya nodded, face ashen. He looked up. Being Mastermind has been fantastic. I'm not a quirkless teenager anymore when I'm wearing my armor. Sumi managed a small grin. You did pull the wool over everybody's eyes this whole time, though. Pretty villainous, if you ask me. Midoriya looked up at her. So, she held up a hand. It sucks that you're not exactly. She waved her hand, settling for old enough, for me, but you're also a great friend, and I really don't want to lose that. She grinned. Now then, who are you again? Midoriya stared at her for a second, then he beamed. A wicked grin split his face, the light of burning buildings shining in his eyes. Well then, I'm Midoriya Izuku, also known as the brilliant supervillain, Mastermind. Thunder roared. Sumi grinned back. The name's Anime Sumi. Inkblot. It took a bit of time, but eventually the League of Supervillains got back together again, stronger than ever. I owed everybody for not trusting them with my real identity, and obviously I had to prove that I meant it, mostly by giving some help here and there. But it all worked out. I'd made a strong connection with the helmet on, and with it off, I had a bit more freedom. Most importantly, I knew beyond a doubt that we are all friends, united beyond just big heists and villainy. Sure, I still occasionally felt that I should have kept my helmet on, worked a bit like Dr. Doom, where nobody saw my true face, but it meant that I could get up to bigger and better plans, and it meant that I had an excuse to show of the basement area. After Christmas, I had such big plans, and it felt like the UA entrance exams were coming closer than ever. Chapter endnotes. This one beat me up a bit. Took a lot of doing. I've never been a fan of protracted drama, even though I could take this third act misunderstanding on for another chapter or two if I really wanted to. Not my style. We should be getting back to something lighter next chapter. Next time, we may finally make it to the exams. Maybe another villainous escapade. Who can say? Chapter Notes, Issue 22. Radio Gaga. See the end of the chapter for notes. Toshinori Yagi huffed, the cold air making his breath mist. Next year, the UA entrance exams would start, and he'd be a teacher. Seeing the beach being cleaned, looking like the area would be completely cleaned by the time of the exams, a warm feeling blossomed in his heart just thinking about it. With their work for the day done, Mirio had popped over. He beamed, a regular ray of sunshine. "You've done a great job here, Melissa." Melissa nodded, a smile on her face. "Sure feels like it." She stretched, loosening up her tired muscles. "This is going to be one of the cleanest beaches in Japan by the time I'm done with it." Mirio let out a hearty chuckle, slapping her on the back. "That's the spirit!" "Ah, Mirio-senpai!" Toshinori's smile widened as he saw their favorite beachcomber coming towards them, the green-haired boy beaming when he ran up to them. He chuckled as the teenager rushed up to them. Midoriya glanced over to Toshinori, giving him a quick bow. "It's good to see you, Toshinori-san." With a chuckle, Toshinori gave the young man a warm smile. "It is good to see you as well, my boy." Young Midoriya rubbed the back of his head. "Ah, it's nothing, really." Melissa gave him a grin. "So what have you been working on lately? Anything interesting?" The young man grinned. "Sure have. I've really been thinking about what to make for the support exam." Toshinori and Melissa both pondered this. Midoriya had been doing a lot of work on his concepts, and like many other people, had been worried that his concepts weren't good enough. "I see what you mean," Melissa murmured. "What would you say your area of focus was again?" Midoriya slumped a bit. "Well, I would say that my best area is quirk analysis. I'm really good at breaking down quirks and how they work." "Ah, but that wouldn't be the best thing to do for a support exam, since I don't know what quirk to design the gear for." Mirio gave him an encouraging smile. "Well, I have to admit your science talk kind of goes over my head. Maybe you need to look at it from a different angle." Midoriya nodded, a frustrated expression on his face. "Oh, I know that. It's just hard to find the right invention." Toshinori could relate. He'd listened to David gripe about his gadgets and potential applications many times. "Still, young Midoriya, I have faith in your ability. Just think about what a hero might need." The young man sighed. "Well, I'm close. I can just feel it." He looked over the beach, then turned back to Melissa. "This is incredible, Melissa. I can actually see the ocean from here." It was just a bit of small talk after that, catching up and talking about exams. Melissa had been doing online schooling, transmitting back to Island to keep up with her friends there. Midoriya had enjoyed his brief break from schoolwork, leaving him freer to invent, but was still a bit glum. Toshinori noticed this. On questioning the young man, Midoriya had sighed. "Well, there's something I've always wanted to get personally, but it's just a bit too far." "What is that, young Midoriya?" He sighed glumly. "Well, it's silly really, but I want to get an All Might signature." His eyes lit up as he continued. "Well, All Might's a really busy hero, and the only major signing event he does is in the Might Tower in Tokyo, and I've never been able to get the booking." Toshinori patted Midoriya on the back. "Don't worry about it, Midoriya. All Might has been doing some hero work here lately." Midoriya's eyes lit up. "Hero work here? I mean, there were a lot of reports about that, but..." He was silenced by a quick wink. "Keep quiet about it, young Midoriya. Who knows? You may get to meet him soon." Toshinori's heart warmed up with the stunned, happy smile that came across the young man's face. Midoriya eventually left, practically skipping home with a cheery wave. Toshinori traded a glance with Melissa and Mirio. Ultimately, Toshinori had lost out due to having a larger face. All three of them were trying not to grin. Later, All Might coincidentally ran into Midoriya before doing a signing at the Mustafu Mall. The young man had stammered at volumes almost too high for the human ear to pick up, offering a notebook with shaky hands. When All Might had pulled his signature, "Your book is already signed" trick, Midoriya had nearly fainted. And Toshinori Yagi had a warm and fuzzy feeling in his chest for the rest of the day, seeing that earnest smile and declaration that it would become a family heirloom. Timeline: 2 months, 3 weeks to exams, mid-December. The League of Supervillains had gone surprisingly quiet over December. Apart from a minor robbery in the week before Christmas, the League had seemed to disappear from the face of Japan. The Mastermind Task Force had kept vigilant, unsure whether this was some sort of bizarre ploy by Mastermind or not. They had appreciated the break, though. Christmas had come and gone, and soon enough it was the dawn of a new year. Unknown to each other, heroes and villains both participated in Hatsumode, even going to similar shrines. Two different prospective hero students had made the trek to the shrine and made similar promises. I want to get into UA this year to become the best hero I can. The rest of the heroes had prayed that Mastermind would get captured soon. Eraserhead had simply stayed in line outside a camping store, waiting for a new sleeping bag. Mount Lady's personal prayer had been simple. Please, no more fan meets where I step on people. I'd even take more Mastermind over that. Midoriya Izuku's prayer had also been to the point. I want to get good enough to be All Might's arch-nemesis. Later, of course, things would get back to normal for the various heroes and villains out there. A time of relative peace that would soon shatter. The devilish machinations of Mastermind and the League of Supervillains would soon start again, and the heroes of Japan would rise to oppose them. But for now, heroes and villains welcomed the new year in, and the new year certainly had interesting incidents. Eraserhead stared at his best friend and sighed. Hisashi, this isn't going to work. This referred to Present Mike's idea to get Mastermind into a set location where they could grab him. By making a shout on social media for Mastermind to join Present Mike on his radio show, for an interview for the most diabolical supervillain the world has ever known. Needless to say, the Mastermind Task Force had been less than thrilled with that idea. Mostly because it meant that Present Mike would drum up his own popularity. They'd resigned themselves to checking on other businesses in the area, just waiting for Mastermind to show up. Present Mike pouted. Ah, Shouto, don't be like that. You said the same thing when I wanted to interview Godzilla and his MILC girlfriend. And that episode of my radio show's one of the most popular I ever did. The voice hero sniffed. He has such a way with words. Eraserhead knew he was going to regret the next question. Mile-seek? Present Mike grinned. Moth, I'd like to cuddle, duh! He pushed his sunglasses back up. Seriously, Mothka is so fluffy, I'm willing to overlook that she's in league with the insect horde. He patted the photo, showing him flashing the peace sign with the monster hero Godzilla and the mega moth hero Mothka. Eraserhead had to admit that Mothka was ridiculously fluffy. Still, somebody had to be rational. With a sigh, Eraserhead glared at the door. He won't show up. One of the most notorious C-list villains in history isn't just going to walk in like a normal person. Wham! Ha! Mastermind is here, entering the radio studio like a normal person. Eraserhead's eyes shot wide open. There was Mastermind, striding in with what must have been a massive grin on his face, green smoke coiling around him and cape fluttering in the wind. He saw Present Mike and beelined over to him. Oh my gosh, it's Present Mike. Can you sign this for me, please? I'm a huge fan. The hero was handed a CD with Present Mike's face on it. The title proclaimed it to be Put Your Hands Up Radio Best Hits, as selected by Present Mike. Do not sign anything. Eraserhead hissed at his friend. Even if it was a ruse to lure him in, signing a villain's merchandise was definitely wrong. Present Mike pretended not to hear him. Sure thing, dedicated listener and despicable supervillain. With a flourish, Present Mike handed Mastermind the signed CD. Always a pleasure, villainous listener. Mastermind let out a whine of pure pleasure. Thank you. This will truly be a family heirloom. With a tap of his gauntlet, a tiny cubicle robot popped out from the folds of his cloak, grabbed the CD, and jetted off before Eraserhead could snag it. He then turned back to Present Mike. So, about the interview? Present Mike grinned. Sure thing. Let's get ready to rumble. Eraserhead's capture weapon writhed around him, but Present Mike made a chopping motion, followed by a pointed look. Reluctantly, Eraserhead decided to let his friend handle it. No matter how irrational this whole deal was, the other villains stared at the invitation. It's a trap, Stitch opined, shaking his head. La Brava nodded. Yep, definitely a trap. Mastermind just laughed. Of course I know it's a trap, which is why I'm going to go. The other villains looked at their friend, still wearing his armor, even after the reveal. Golden Grin was the first to speak, a can of energy drink in his hand. Why are you going to get captured?" Mastermind giggled. "Captured? Me?" Golden Grin shook his head. "Well, yeah. There's going to be heroes there, you know? Competent ones?" Mastermind tilted his head. "I should hope so, especially since it will be a great distraction." That got the attention of the League. "Well, hey there, listeners. Are you ready to put your hands up?" Nedzu cheerfully stirred his cup of tea as the radio blared. "Well, listeners, you won't believe who I'm interviewing today. He's made waves in Musutafu and a couple of other spots. It's Mastermind." As the studio audience applauded, Mastermind apparently greeting various people, Nedzu idly tapped his laptop screen, several camera feeds showing up. Carefully, he tilted the camera in Present Mike's studio to focus better on Mastermind. "Thank you for inviting me onto your show, Present Mike. I mean, gosh, I never would have thought I would get here." After a few seconds of close observation, Nedzu giggled. "A shell game, Mastermind? How interesting." The possible rodent laughed, before quickly sending a message to various heroes. Hopefully, they would receive it in time. The Asuha City Bank had been relatively quiet, employees on break idly checking in on the latest bomb, Put Your Hands Up broadcast. With dedicated heroes like Fat Gum on patrol, they hadn't needed to worry about too much, which was why they were surprised when the door was shoved open and several dastardly members of the League of Supervillains strode in. With a flash of aplomb and a placed hacking device, the workers there quickly got the drill. Money was shoved into the cartoonish bags with yen symbols on them. You won't get away with this," the manager squeaked as he watched Mr. Warp and Gentle Criminal disappear the vast majority of the vault's contents. Mr. Warp tipped his hat to the man as they waltzed out. "I'm terrible sorry, sir, but I believe we already have." Outside, the heroes had gathered. Fat Gum himself was at the head, a grin on his face. "Well, let's go get him, Soon Eater." The teenager sighed. "I just want to go home," he mumbled. Still, he squared up, tentacles readying themselves. The villains shared a glance, then Inkblot was the first to leap into the fray, mallet at the ready. "Come get some!" Mount Lady and Kamui Woods ran at full tilt to Present Mike Studios, Death Arms following close behind them. Should have known he'd do some stupid shit like this," Mount Lady grumbled. "Indeed, this kind of thing may not be pure evil, but it is approaching it," Kamui Woods chipped in, getting closer. "So, Mastermind, why do you have the Thunder Machine, and can I get one?" "Well, Present Mike, I thought that if I'm a dastardly supervillain, I should at least make sure I present myself properly. There's villains, and then there's supervillains, you know? The difference is presentation." Present Mike whooped with that statement. "Yeah, you tell him. It's the truth." "Oh, and about the Thunder Machine." As the heroes rounded the corner, a storefront exploded in a cloud of debris. Somebody inside called out for help. A large figure, positively bulging with muscles, burst out of a store, a cash register in hand. "Ha! Got it!" Death Arms was on him. Sparks flew as he built up power to deal with the villain. About 9 months ago, his speed had been middling at best, but due to dealing with Mastermind, Hypercharge Rush, the thug was pummeled into submission and in cuffs within a couple of seconds, Death Arms making sure that the thug was left for the authorities. After a quick word of reassurance to the shop owner, he was back on the move. Kamui Woods pinned a villain down to the ground before the other man even knew what had happened. "Lacquer Chain Prison." "Oh, the inspiration for my gear?" "Well, I'm always inspired by current tech trends. I suppose some of my biggest inspirations were old movies from before Quirks, but some more recent films they must have been some of the most unfortunate heroes around, because there was yet another villain attack, this one going for the bridge over the train station. With a determined expression on her face, Mount Lady was underneath, shooting up to not quite her full height to support the bridge. "Go get him! I've got this!" she shouted to her companions, who duly complied. Mastermind, get away with this? Not on their watch. Present Mike, in spite of his outward appearances, was not an idiot. He wasn't going to deny that having Mastermind on air was a rare opportunity, but he was also using it as a chance for an unofficial broadcast regarding his location. "So anyways, Mastermind, what's your favorite song?" The shorter man looked upwards. "Well, I'm a big fan of the Bond soundtrack. Those movies are so amazing. The gadgets, the bases, the death traps. The door burst open, revealing Death Arms and Kamui Woods. Present Mike gave them a pretend glare. Hey, come on guys, I'm still interviewing him. Death Arms stared at Present Mike, then shifted his glare to Mastermind. The shorter villain sat there, hands clasped in front of him. Well, Mastermind, you're cornered. We are arresting you for theft, assault, and using your quirk illegally. Mastermind grinned before turning to Present Mike. Sorry to cut the interview short, Present Mike. Do you want me to? For a moment, the pro sat there before he remembered the equipment in his studio. Yes, please fight outside. This stuff ain't cheap. Mastermind gave him a thumbs up. Of course. Eraserhead was the first to make a move, his capture tape lashing out to ensnare the villain. Mastermind, in response, sprang forwards at near impossible speeds. A tap of his gauntlet, and a nozzle popped up. Thrusting it in Eraserhead's face, a red mist squirted out before Eraserhead could dodge, and then Eraserhead knew pain. Fellow villains, behold. Izuku held up a small bottle in his hand, filled with a red liquid. A couple of other bottles were at the ready. Sumi squinted at the bottle. So, what is it? Oh, it's pepper spray, my special formula. Daiki looked at him oddly. Pretty sure I can buy that at the store. Tutting, Izuku shook a finger. This isn't any ordinary pepper spray. This is non-allergenic, with a chemical trick that makes it hotter and harder to wipe off, while it can still be washed away easily. His expression turned more serious. I designed this with Eraserhead in mind. The League leaned away from the grin on his face. He can't erase quirks if he's been pepper sprayed, right? Mastermind managed to get past the wheezing hero, politely bowing. So sorry, Eraserhead. It should— Whoa! He barely ducked as Kamui Woods tried to lash out with his own quirk, attempting to bind the villain before he could cause more damage. Mastermind swung his spray nozzle at him, but Kamui Woods was ready. As the spray came for his armored face, a shield of wood sprang up in front, blocking the chemical. Nature's shield, Mastermind clapped. Wow, is that a new super move? What a privilege. Wham! Fellow villains, behold. Izuku held up a small bottle in his hand, filled with a red liquid. A couple of other bottles were at the ready. Sumi squinted at the bottle. So, what is it? Oh, it's pepper spray, my special formula. Daiki looked at him oddly. Pretty sure I can buy that at the store. Tutting, Izuku shook a finger. This isn't any ordinary pepper spray. This is non-allergenic, with a chemical trick that makes it hotter and harder to wipe off, while it can still be washed away easily. His expression turned more serious. I designed this with Eraserhead in mind. The League leaned away from the grin on his face. He can't erase quirks if he's been pepper sprayed, right? Mastermind managed to get past the wheezing hero, politely bowing. So sorry, Eraserhead. It should— Whoa! He barely ducked as Kamui Woods tried to lash out with his own quirk, attempting to bind the villain before he could cause more damage. Mastermind swung his spray nozzle at him, but Kamui Woods was ready. As the spray came for his armored face, a shield of wood sprang up in front, blocking the chemical. Nature's shield, Mastermind clapped. Wow, is that a new super move? What a privilege. Wham! Death Arms grinned as his fist connected, only to go pale. Mastermind had whipped around, blocking the hit with both arms outstretched. The villain stared at the hero, then rushed him with his arms primed for a powerful strike. But in his haste, he had forgotten Kamui Woods. With a creaking of wood, Mastermind was tightly bound. Lacquered chain prison. Meanwhile, in Esoa, Fatgum grinned, panting yet triumphant. The battle had been going for a fair time, the heroes managing to hold their own against the villains and prevent an easy escape. He wouldn't say it was over, but they had managed to get an edge on the villains. Inside his body, Inkblot was struggling. Let me go. You, she spluttered, trying to pull herself out of him. Not a chance, lady, he crowed, letting his body absorb the impact as she punched away. The mallet hit had stung, but it was resting on the ground, the villainess unable to get proper leverage from inside his body. Suneater was currently dealing with Gentle Criminal, the villain elastifying the air around him, Suneater trying to lash his tentacles around the barrier. In spite of his calm demeanor, the villain had a bead of sweat on his temple. Maybe it's time for our escape. La! Thwip! He hastily ducked under a tentacle, Suneater pressing the advantage. With a quick wrap of his tentacle around a pole, he pulled himself behind the villain, lashing out at Mr. Warp as he skipped around a pour. The mastermind in the room simply stood there with his hands on hips. Then, from a different room, you wondered about the distraction Ameliv. Well, tada! The villains whipped around in their seats to see Izuku cheerfully walking from a side room with a large remote control in hand. The teenager had dressed himself up neatly, wearing a pair of teal slacks and shiny dark red shoes. He wore a dark red shirt paired with a teal-green sleeveless vest. Like a mirror of the clothes thrown over his villain outfit. Inkblot boggled. How? With a whoop, La Brava ran over to Mastermind, checking the remote in his hand. You got it to work then, Midoriya grinned, dark green eyes flashing. I sure did. Introducing the diabolical electronic kick-ass unit. It's taken me a lot of time to get this right, and now I'm ready to deploy it. His head snapped over to Twice. Twice, I'm going to need a clone of myself. This way, the clone can control it remotely from here, while I go with you guys. To rob the bank up at Esuha, Gentle Criminal finished. He gave his protege a grin. You've outdone yourself, Mastermind. Midoriya flushed tomato red after that statement. At a loss for words, he patted his robot. It's accurate to the last detail. I even included my mask's anti-tampering measures. Mastermind sighed. I'd really hoped you foolish heroes would have been tied up longer. Still, he wasn't able to break free of Kamui Wood's binding, but did manage to get his thunder machine free. Memoah! Crackathum! You heroes have fallen for my dastardly body double. Death Arms and Kamui Woods were already leaving, Eraserhead running into the room to make sure the double was secured. Neds will want to get this. Zun! Death Arms swore as the mastermind double suddenly slumped like a puppet on a string. Furiously, he tried to tug its helmet off Zap, and was sent backwards, stunned and charged up as electricity shot through him. The mastermind in the trap didn't move, then it started to smoke. Before their eyes, the double had dissolved into a black sludge, electronics sparking briefly before going dark. Kamui and Death Arms stood there stunned for a moment, then ran off, calling for a police car to get them to Esuha. In the bathroom, present Mike sighed. Should have thought he'd build a robot body double, he grumbled. Mike then brightened up, grinning. At least I got an interview out of it. Eraserhead stared at his friend with a flat expression on his face. Without saying a word, he pulled his sleeping bag on. Back at the hideout, the villains pulled in, having managed to dodge the heroes chasing after them. That was intense, Mastermind shouted, pulling his helmet off. The rest of the villains nodded, Mr. Compress reverting the money back to its regular size. Indeed it was, the trench coat-wearing villain acknowledged, patting the younger man on the back. Inside, Twice's copy of Mastermind grinned at the original. Oh man, doing that interview was incredible. I would have preferred to be there in person, but, Izuku nodded. We want to keep Twice's copy Quirk out of sight for as long as possible. Keep them guessing about how we did it. He frowned. Now, when are we going to build the next one? Copy Izuku just laughed. Already working on it. The pair of them started laughing maniacally, the League of Supervillains watching nervously. Twice rubbed the back of his head. I think this may be worse than my self-duplication, not disagreeing. The other villains didn't know what to say about that. Timeline: 1 month, 1 week to exams, early January. Izuku had been slightly worried about doing this for a while. He was pretty confident that it would work, but still, at least everybody else was nervous. Kaneshiro fidgeted with his t-shirt. Aiba and Danjuro wore polite smiles but seemed ready to bolt if things didn't go well. Sumi was looking vaguely. Time to pull off the greatest act of all. He put on a brave smile. Are you guys ready to meet my mother? With a chorus of yes, with varying levels of enthusiasm, Izuku turned around, taking a deep breath. All they had to do was convince his mom that they were normal people. Easy enough. Midoriya Inko gave a polite smile to her son's co-workers. Izuku had given introductions, saying that some of his friends hadn't made it due to managing the coffee shop. She had been concerned that Izuku shrugged. For some reason, he didn't want to go have tea with us. And besides, Mom, what do you mean about Bakugo? Bakugo's a good friend. Inko Midoriya sighed. Young Katsuki was always Izuku's first friend, even if the explosive young man had denied it, in spite of his willingness to talk to Izuku. Mitsuki had stated, quite bluntly, that Katsuki didn't so much have friends as he had hangers-on apart from Izuku. Katsuki had been better after a long, hard stare, and despite how rocky things had gotten when he'd become a teenager, she knew that he was at least Izuku's best friend, if nothing else. Well, he's just lucky he's got you in his corner. While Izuku grinned and flushed, she turned to his coworkers with a bright smile. Izuku, would you be a dear and get the tea ready? Izuku beamed. Sure thing, Mom. As he left, Inko turned a cheerful smile to her son's guests. She gently gestured for them to come in. Have a seat, please. As they sat down in the comfortable living room with a reasonable amount of space dedicated to All Might merchandise, Inko sighed, looking over at her son as he bustled with cups. He's wonderful, isn't he? Daiki hesitantly nodded. Sure is. He, really helped me with my midterms. Did pretty well. She sighed, a proud smile on her face. Trust her genius son to help a friend like that. Oh, that's nice of him. Now, tell me about your work. I'm interested. Danjuro was the first to speak. Well, we manage a thriving coffee shop. We're primarily based in Musutafu, but we've helped manage events in other parts of Tokyo and other cities as well. Inko smiled attentively. Izuku had mentioned something like this, that they went to other cities on the train to attend events. It sounds exciting, Sumi smiled. You have no idea. Some of our customers just can't get enough. Izuku came with the tea, smiling to their guests. Well, it isn't what we usually make at the store, but it's good. Danjuro gave a calm smile as he accepted a cup. I don't doubt it, young man. Inko smiled. It was so good for Izuku to have friends that appreciated him and didn't swear in the house. Timeline: 2 weeks to exams, assuming UA exams in mid-February. After that initial meeting, I'd managed to make sure that everything was set up for future gatherings. Mom was just really happy that my friends were so nice. I've had friends with the drama club, but not friends like Kachin. Acquaintances? That might be the better word. So we had tea and talked, and Gentle-san really impressed Mom with how gentlemanly he was. She also got along really well with Sumi. To be honest, I really had no idea that Sumi was interested in me romantically. I just thought it was banter. I never really thought anybody'd be interested in Quirkless Deku like that. After that thing with Odd Eye, I had noticed that Kachen was being nicer. But enough of that. This isn't a story about me being bitter about past stuff, because soon the support exam was upon me, and I was ready to start my journey into UA. Chapter end notes. This one took me a bit longer than normal. I had gastro and felt like shit, and other jobs popped up which took up time. Next time, we're finally going to get to the exams and canon, yay, though I might do some other bits before then. Please comment, tell me what went wrong, right and otherwise. Chapter notes, issue 23, examical reaction, support, see the end of the chapter for notes. As soon as Izuku's alarm blared, his eyes shot open. Today was the day. Time for phase 2 of his dastardly plans, infiltrate UA and learn everything that he could. Not just that, but keep an eye on Kachan and any other bright prospects and help mold them into great heroes. And maybe make friends. Izuku had barely been able to get to sleep. For the past couple of weeks, he decided to stay away from villainy. Gentle Criminal and La Brava had been shocked to hear he was entering UA, though when he'd clarified as a support student, they'd been relieved. Izuku had been allowed to remain a villain as long as he had an escape route from villainy, which Gentle had approved. Izuku shook himself. Can't worry about that. I've got to look my best. It's UA. If I'm badly dressed, then the heroes will figure out I'm a villain, and I'll be arrested, and then Mom will kill me, and I'll be in jail. He ran into the shower, train of thought continuing. The shower was hot enough to boil an egg in there, but Izuku could barely feel it. Shampoo, conditioner, and a quick scrub down later, and Izuku was as clean and presentable as he was ever going to be. Resigned to the futility of the exercise, he tried to comb his unruly hair. It didn't take him long to pull his uniform on. Staring at himself in the mirror, he gave a determined nod. Right. This was going to be his support academia. His mom stuck her head around the corner. Izuku, breakfast's ready, and Bakugo's here to go to UA as well. He gave himself a villainous smirk. Coming, Mom. Bakugo Katsuki glared up at Deku as he ran down to breakfast. Morning, nerd, he grumbled. Deku Izuku smiled brightly at him. "Good morning, Kachan," he chirped before heading over to the table. Auntie Inko gave Bakugo a polite smile. He turned his scowl down to a more neutral expression. "Do you want to have something, Bakugo-kun?" Bakugo sighed. "I've already had breakfast, Auntie." She shook her head, offering a small bowl. The damn nerd was eating quickly and efficiently. "It's going to be a big day, Izuku and you going off to your entrance exams. I've never been prouder." Bakugo sighed, accepting the bowl. "Thanks for the food, Auntie." He managed to finish it reasonably quickly, just as the nerd finished the last bit of his breakfast. Deku Izuku gave him a cheerful smile, to which Bakugo responded by shoving the nerd's surprisingly heavy backpack at him. "Here, let's get moving. If I am late because of you." Deku just gave him a cheerful laugh, pulling his backpack on. "Don't worry, Kachan, everything's prepared." UA, the top hero school in the country, having produced so many of top heroes, some people think just going to the school makes you a hero. Like Best Genist, Sixful Taylor, and winner of the Best Genist Award 8 years in a row. Admittedly, that is a bit weird, but whatever. Or Endeavor, the man with the highest number of solved cases for a single person in history, and the #1 of the heroes that look like villains category, beating out many others. And of course, the great superhero, All Might. No more needs to be said. The hero course only accepts 1 in 300 applicants, and one of those is going to be Kachan. I just know it. However, the other courses are nothing to sneeze at as well. UA's business course members become prominent members of Japan's business and politicians. Its general course students are rated consistently in the top 20 of academic rankings, if not the top 10. And of course, the support course graduates tend to work for the very top heroes or at I-Island, working on hero support gear. It'll be a prime way for me to know how to help them in future. After all, if they have the most super gear possible, it will only help them become the best heroes they can be. Izuku hummed happily as they walked to UA. "So, Kachan, what do you reckon the practical exam's going to be like?" "It's going to be a heroics course, so what would they test for? Speed of rescue? Reassurances?" Kachan just scoffed, kicking a can out of the way. "What the fuck are you talking about? Stupid shit like that isn't going to be on the exam." Izuku hummed. "So how would you test for heroics then?" He had a good idea of what his arch-nemesis considered proper heroics, but he wanted to be sure. Sure enough, Kachan snapped. "Fighting, you idiot. What else?" Idly, he steered Izuku out of the way of a telephone pole. Izuku barely reacted to that, settling for a frown. "Kachan, being a hero is about more than beating up villains. Look at Endeavor. #2 in the rankings, not even top 50 in the popularity polls. Well, what do you think a hero should be, huh?" That got Izuku to look at his friend. Ever since that incident with Odd Eye, Kachan had improved, even if most people wouldn't have seen it that way. "Well, heroes rescue people in dangerous situations, make them feel safe, inspire," Kachan scoffed. "Any situation like that, UA would have to set people up to potentially get hurt. Some dipshits get hurt like that." Izuku hummed, conceding the point. Then his eyes lit up as he hit on the next topic. "So, would you say teachers or robots?" Kachan stared at Izuku blankly for a second, then his scowl returned. "Robots? What? Nah, it's definitely teachers, or other students." They rounded the corner. Izuku gestured animatedly. "Why would it be other students? That just proves who's best with injuries. No, it's gotta be teachers or robots. I'm thinking robots. UA can certainly afford them." Kachan shook his head. "Why the fuck would they waste all that money on some easily destroyed robots, Deku? Gotta be teachers." Izuku shook his head. "They have the ability to use them, though. Why wouldn't they? The teachers can't be there just for heroics." Kachan stared at Izuku with an angry yet tired look on his face. "Look, just because they could afford it doesn't mean they would. I mean, just think about it like that." Well, Kachan could say silly things like that, but Izuku didn't know why you wouldn't use robots if you had the option to. Izuku opened his mouth to make a retort, but then they caught a glimpse of UA's front gates for the first time. The building itself was shaped like a giant H. All around it, the famous UA wall protected students and teachers alike from villain attacks and unwanted press. Currently, it was open, allowing a stream of students to walk through to their exams under the watchful eyes of the heroes assigned there. Izuku felt a tear in the corner of his eye. This is it. They spent a few seconds staring at the gates to UA before Bakugo managed to clear his throat. Time to say the goddamn mushy crap. Probably had needed to say this shit before. It seemed impossible to say at this point, though. Sorry, I've treated you like shit because I thought you were looking down on me. Sorry for thinking you were trying to be a hero when you've said you weren't interested, even though I knew you'd be a great hero if you had a quirk. Bakugo shook his head angrily. He'd apologize some other time, but he would give the nerd the right encouragement. If you don't make it into UA, I'm gonna fucking kill you, he ground out. It wasn't an apology, but it was going to be enough. Deku turned to him with a teary, shocked expression. Kachan, it then changed into a smile. That's the nicest thing you've said about me getting into UA ever, Bakugo scoffed. Whatever. Get out of my damn way. My exam's in a different building, and I'm not going to be late because of you. He glared at the nerd. I'll meet you here after the written exam, okay? Izuku, the damn nerd, waved him goodbye. Got it, he happily waved. Good luck. Bakugo stomped off. Damn nerd. As if he needed luck to crush this goddamn exam. After waving Ketchin goodbye, Izuku followed the map on his phone to where the support exam was being held, materially helped by generous signposting. As he approached, he could hear some interesting sounds coming his way. The sound of clanking and tinkering, accompanied by maniacal laughter. As an expert in maniacal laughter himself, Izuku rated this cackler as being quite good for an amateur. Intrigued, he followed it into the support exam room. This area was probably smaller than the hero exam, considering how many students he'd seen going to that specific exam. It looked like a small lecture hall, every student assigned to a workbench. A girl with thick pink locks was tinkering with something large on her desk, cackling. Just a few more pieces, and my beautiful baby will blow all of you out of the water. Next to her sat a girl with hair coiling in blue and orange strands and a long, suffering look. The inventor thrust a hand out, and the other girl responded, picking up a spanner in her right hand. A blue glow surrounded her hand, the other glowing orange. The spanner slid into one hand and out the other, the inventor seizing it and returning to the innards of her contraption. Curious, Izuku sat in the empty seat, everybody else in the room apparently keeping a wide berth. He tilted his head, examining it. It looked like a cannon, or maybe a launcher of sorts. The pink-haired inventor looked up, cross-haired pupils focusing on Izuku and a manic grin splitting her face. Izuku gave her a polite bow. Ah, new minion, hold this! Izuku stared at the piece of equipment thrust in his face for a second, then held it while the inventor returned to the inner workings. Izuku idly examined the cylinder in his hands, noting its size in comparison with the barrel. The other girl gave him a desperate look, pleading for help. Izuku gave her a hesitant smile, pointing with his eyes at the gun. All hope died in her eyes. With a final cackle, the inventor was done, delicately closing the main hatch before picking it up. Minions, behold! She held it up to the ceiling, as if expecting God himself to shine a light on it. Rejoice, for my beautiful baby, the new, improved Netmaster 6000 has been brought into existence. Izuku clapped, idly wondering why the other students weren't. He'd so rarely seen the joy of creation on another person's face. So, why 6000? The inventor whipped to face him. Good question, minion. This baby is an improvement on the Netmaster 9000, made both more compact and software upgradable. Izuku nodded, looking over it. All blue steel and plastic, the two-handed net gun was an impressive piece. He smiled. This had clearly been in development for a while. The inventor grinned, seeing his interest. Not every day that somebody appreciates a good net gun. Izuku hummed. It is good, yes. The propulsion system is... She beamed at him. Hydrogen-based, yes. Electrical signal. For ignition, but the exhaust. Bleeds down the sides with... Oh, I see! Are those... Beryllium copper dampeners, yes. The girl with blue and orange hair stared at the pair of them with a flat expression. I should have known it would happen here. He's on her wavelength. People have said, all hope is lost. We're going to die, in a cheerier tone of voice. She stared at the rest of the room, at some point at 1,000 yards. I knew I should have gone to general education, but no, I had to come here to stop May from leveling the place. The pair of them at this point were ignoring her, caught up in the specifics of the design. Izuku gestured animatedly at the gun. See if you use Duralumin with an aluminum coating for the main body. For the main frame, that'll reduce weight but without sacrificing integrity, and it'll look damn amazing, his fellow inventor cackled, Izuku joining in. The rest of the room watched this warily, but lacked the existential dread such a meeting should have produced. Grinning, she stuck her hand out. Hatsume Mei, soon to be the greatest support inventor in the world. Izuku grinned, shaking her hand. Midoriya Izuku. Same! The other girl groaned. Well, if there's no justice in the world, I'll be in the support course as well. Sayu Mayumi, Mei's friend and the main reason our school didn't burn down. Please don't try and take over the world. Oh, I see. Are those beryllium copper dampeners? Yes. The girl with blue and orange hair stared at the pair of them with a flat expression. I should have known it would happen here. He's on her wavelength. People have said, all hope is lost. We're going to die, in a cheerier tone of voice. She stared at the rest of the room at some point at 1,000 yards. I knew I should have gone to general education, but no, I had to come here to stop Mei from leveling the place. The pair of them at this point were ignoring her, caught up in the specifics of the design. Izuku gestured animatedly at the gun. See if you use Duralumin with an aluminum coating for the main body. For the main frame? That'll reduce weight but without sacrificing integrity, and it'll look goddamn amazing, his fellow inventor cackled, Izuku joining in. The rest of the room watched this warily but lacked the existential dread such a meeting should have produced. Grinning, she stuck her hand out. Hatsume Mei, soon to be the greatest support inventor in the world. Izuku grinned, shaking her hand. Midoriya Izuku. Same! The other girl groaned. Well, if there's no justice in the world, I'll be in the support course as well. Sayu Mayumi, Mei's friend and the main reason our school didn't burn down. Please don't try and take over the world. He leveled a glare at the room, Izuku practically vibrating as he tried to keep his hero muttering quiet. For this exam, we will be rating you on how well you can sell your item, not for money, but rather how well you can convince us that your device is useful. As a member of support, your second largest hurdle will be persuading heroes to use your support gear. For a moment he slumped. It took 7 of us, all begging, to persuade Present Mike to install volume control in his gear. Powerloader straightened up, confidence returned. The final phase will be repair. That'll be in a different room. We'll have some items there according to each of your specialties and the equipment necessary to repair it. You will have up to an hour to repair those items as best you can. He swept a gaze around the room. Any further questions? When none came, he smiled. Just remember to give it your all. He checked a list in his hands. Now, we'll do this in alphabetical order. Once everybody's done their work, then we'll start the third phase. With that, names started to be called out, students leaving one at a time to be judged in the side room. Izuku pulled out his hero notebook for the future and started to write furiously, trying to distract himself from his nerves. Hatsume Mei sat there with a confident grin on her face, polishing her net gun. Some students left confident, some were crestfallen, some left hesitant. Eventually, Mei was called, skipping in with confidence. Good luck, Izuku wished. Don't need it. She kicked the door in, striding in as if she owned the place. When she left, it was with the confidence of a cat that had not just got into the cream, but had also eaten the budgie and the goldfish. Nailed it! Izuku gave her a smile, which was returned in a more manic fashion. Eventually, Midoriya Izuku. Izuku pushed himself up, taking a deep breath. He had this. The next room over had a small panel of 3 judges, along with a life-sized dummy of a person. Powerloader was sitting in the middle, with Lunch Rush sitting next to him. The third hero Izuku didn't recognize off the top of his head, a tall woman with long white hair, a small domino mask and a neat black suit, an oversized needle and thread slung over her back. For a moment he stood there, then his eyes widened as he connected the dots. Oh, you're Weaver, the silk thread hero. Weaver gently chuckled. It's always nice to be recognized, but meeting me isn't what you came for, is it? Izuku's eyes widened and he quickly bowed. Ah, sorry. Lunch Rush cleared his throat. Midoriya Izuku, Quirk, none. There wasn't any hint of judgment in his voice, which was nice. The pro hero looked at his notes again. Perfect grades and highly recommended by your teachers. You submitted a blueprint for a temperature-controllable and sweat-wicking chest plate. Izuku nodded. I thought that heroes didn't wear a lot of body armor because of the weight and lack of comfort, so... Powerloader held up a claw. You passed our initial stage. We simply wanted to confirm. He gave Izuku a friendly smile. Now, what item have you brought in today? Izuku's confident smile returned. From his backpack, he pulled out a small metal cylinder, about the size of a large can of soft drink. Well, this is similar to one of my first inventions. The same principle, basically. He held it out in front of him, then pressed the button. A cloud of smoke burst out, along with the sound of sliding fabric. When it cleared, Izuku stood there, hands on hips, a bright red cape fluttering on a non-existent wind, secured by a pair of round closures on the shoulders. Introducing the portable cape for the hero on the go. Mutter, mutter. Weaver looked at the cape with a gleam in her eye. The wind effect is interesting. How did you manage it? Izuku grinned. Well, I have to admit I was inspired by Mastermind's own design, so I thought about how I could make my own design. Basically, I threaded high-tensile wires through the fabric down to the end. The wires flex according to electrical impulses, causing a fluttering effect. Powerloader grunted, jotting down some notes. Does the cape do anything else? Izuku grinned. It's a similar idea that I had with the chest plate. The cape itself has a couple of secondary features. He tapped the left closures button. The wires themselves can heat up for cooler weather and act as a minor air conditioner, allowing for the cape to maintain optimal temperatures. As well, the wires make the cape highly tear-resistant and can also flex with stored energy, making a protective shell for the hero or other person inside. The judges hummed, Izuku demonstrating the function by tapping the button and twisting, causing the cape to rustle briefly. He removed the cape and put it on the dummy. Pulling a wrench out of his backpack, he took a swing at the cloak. The fabric of the cloak held in place, then flexed back with the swing. Making a few notes of her own, Weaver checked the fabric. You would be able to work other fabrics in with this, wouldn't you? Izuku nodded. Of course, I just used that since it was all I could easily get my hands on. Satisfied, she went back to the panel. Lunch Rush was the next to speak. So, Midoriya, I just have to ask, why a cape? While impressive, it seems a bit different from your initial blueprint. Izuku nodded. Well, I know, which is why I've got my blueprints for this as well. As he pulled out his blueprints, he continued. I have to admit, this was a bit of a last-minute change with my design, but I was talking to a friend about what a hero needed. Early January, Izuku sighed, tapping at the blueprint. It's still not quite right, he grumbled. Over on the beach, he could see Melissa continuing to haul trash away, encouraged by Yagi-san. Next to him, Mirio leaned over good-naturally. So still a bit stuck on what to do for the support exam? Izuku sighed angrily, chewing on his pencil. I know this is the right angle, but it still feels like I'm missing something. Gear for the hero on the go is great, but I can't help but think it won't be enough. Mirio laughed. Well, I've met a lot of support track students who say much the same thing, so you're halfway there already. That wasn't reassuring to Izuku, the teenager slumping down on the bench. What does a hero need? Mirio patted him gently on the back. Well, I don't know about all of this technical stuff, but I could give you some pointers if you like. Izuku looked at Mirio, eyes sparkling. Really? Mirio's sunshine smile got wider. Sure thing. He looked at the blueprint, humming and tongue stuck out in concentration. Then he looked back up. Yeah, I don't understand any of this at all. Izuku couldn't help but grin at his senpai. Well, I'm designing it for rapid mobility heroes so that they can change their costumes on the go. Mirio put on a serious face. Not a bad idea, but most of the time heroes are out on active patrol. It might be a bit niche. Izuku nodded glumly. I know, I've got to find a better way to sell it. He stared at his notes, daring them to make sense. It's just hard to think of what a hero needs. Mirio chuckled. Isn't that true? He stared out at the ocean for a short time before looking back at Izuku. As I said, I don't know the technical details, but I do know about heroics. He gave Izuku a confident smile. Do you know why I have a cape in my costume? Izuku looked at Mirio with wide eyes. You have a cape on your costume? That's great. So few heroes bother with capes. I mean, All Might used to have a cape back in his golden age, but… Mirio nodded. Wasn't he worried it could get caught on things? Izuku nodded, still beaming. Which is a shame, as they just look so good if you've got the build to pull them off. Mirio's smile became more wistful. That's certainly true, but that wasn't the only reason why heroes choose to have a cape added. Izuku took a deep breath, looking at the judges. Well, my friend, who's a bit older than I am, he's a second year, will be a third year, he said. He took a deep breath, eyes steely. He said that heroes wear their capes so that they can wrap people in them when they're cold and scared. Izuku couldn't help but smile gently as he tapped the right closures button twice, causing the whole thing to snap back into its can in an instant. So that's what I made. I wanted a cape that wasn't just cool, but a hero or civilian could look at it and think, I'll be safe because I have that cape. The judges looked between each other. Power Loader was the first to speak. Thank you, Midoriya. We will mail you the results of your exam within a week. Izuku felt like he was on cloud 9 as he met up with the rest of the examinees. Each workbench had been marked with where students had to go, with covers over the items they were working on. Mei took one look at his face and cackled. So, did your baby knock them out of the park? Izuku couldn't help but grin back. I think it did. He looked out at the rest of the examinees. Hopefully we'll start soon. I'm walking home with a friend. Mei focused on him. What exam is your friend taking? Heroics? Will he need any other babies in his work? Izuku hummed. Definitely. I think he made his own outfit design, even though I would have happily worked on it with him. They chatted about support for a while, Sayu managing to make it over to them eventually, guided by some sixth sense for chaos. Eventually, every student had gone through the exam, Power Loader and the other teachers coming in to check on the examinees. All right, how are you all feeling? As the mix of happy and unsure sounds finished, Lunch Rush stepped up. Now then, students, it's time for the third phase, the practical. You'll see that each of you has their own workbench, stocked with what you need. Please, raise your hand if you have a question during the exam. You have 1 hour. Power Loader swept his gaze over every student, watching for a second to see if anybody was going to object. Begin. With that, every student pulled the cover off their workbench, getting to work on the components within. Most of the students were working on machinery, while others were focusing on what looked like damaged uniforms. At least one Izuku could see was cooking something. Maybe that was another part of support? He found the work relaxing, humming as he repaired the damaged robotics in front of him. Rewire this, replace this burnt piece of tech, change the circuit board. He muttered under his breath, peacefully tinkering away. Izuku finished his repair job within 30 minutes. Wiping his hands clean with a rag, he held up his hand, pointing to his completed repair job. With a quick demonstration of it working and a short nod from Power Loader, Izuku sat at his desk, idly taking out his notebook and starting to scribble notes and designs. Behind him, he heard Hatsume exclaim as loudly as the exam allowed that her repaired baby was complete. Izuku smiled. Mei was certainly going places. On their way to the written exam, Mei grabbed Izuku's arm. You actually beat me in terms of repair speed. Not bad, Midoriya. Izuku blushed, rubbing the back of his head. Ah, it's nothing. I just have a lot of experience with pulling things apart and then putting them back together again, that's all. Mei grinned, holding out a hodgepodge of a phone with numerous additional modules. All right, I've decided. Her crosshair eyes focused on Izuku's face, studying it intently. I'm getting your number for support projects and stopping Mastermind. Izuku pulled out his own phone. I've never gotten somebody's… His brain caught up with her words and he stopped. Wait, stopping Mastermind? Mei's bombastic smile went away. Yeah, Mastermind's dragging the good name of support tech and mad science through the mud. Not just that, I had this amazing idea for a kinetic energy-absorbing baby, and he went ahead and soiled the concept by making… She glared at nothing in particular. Her eyelid twitched. Soiled it. Sayu sighed, looking at Izuku with tired eyes. You just had to push the Mastermind button, didn't you? Izuku was at a bit of a loss for words. Well, it wouldn't be the first time he was going to befriend somebody who was opposed to his supervillain self. Right. Well, here's my number? He proffered his contact details to the hyperactive girl. May's smile returned. Good choice, minion. She tapped away in her phone, holding out her number for Izuku to copy. Well, see you in UA, minion. She skipped off, leaving them there. Izuku grinned. See you there as well, Hatsume. Sayu sighed. We're doomed. The written exam had been a hard trial, but Izuku was confident he'd made it through. He'd been studying for it for most of his time being a villain. Thanks to Twice's clone of Izuku, he'd been able to study more while still maintaining his gear. Kacchan was waiting for him at the gate, looking angrier than normal. Izuku jogged up to him, a concerned expression on his face. Kacchan, his friend snarled. It was robots. Oh, well, that would explain it. Izuku grinned, striding alongside his old friend. So how did the exam go? Kacchan snorted, pulling his backpack up tighter. I fucking aced that shit. He paused, then kept talking, each word sounding forced. What about yours? Izuku grinned. Well, I know that I passed it, and I made friends. Kacchan stared at him flatly for a second. Figures, he grumbled. Izuku stared off into the afternoon sunshine. Already his mind was seething with plans and schemes, just waiting to unleash them onto the world. He couldn't wait to work with May in future. Chapter endnotes. Well, here it is. The exam. I decided to split this into two parts, support and heroics. One of my biggest influences was Al, and in his eyes, a galaxy, a fantastic fic about support Izuku. Most of this was flat out stolen from inspired by this fic, including May's friend and a bit of the structure. I thought that the support exam should have a requirement where basically all students have to put in their blueprint to prove they've got what it takes. I'll go into more detail on what support, in my mind, entails in future chapters. Chapter Notes Issue 24, Examical Reaction, Heroes. See the end of the chapter for 1 week later. Notes. Compared to other students, Bakugo wasn't worried. Given all of the robots he'd fucking murdered, he knew he was going to bin UA for sure. He'd been sitting comfortably on 77 points at the end, more than any other extra had been able to get. He knew that he had the best score possible. He'd spent his week waiting for results while doing extra study and training. Just because he was the goddamn best didn't mean that he was going to sit on his laurels. He gave the limited edition All Might poster on his wall a determined glare. He'd have to work on beating the number one, so he had to improve as much as possible. Turning back to his workbook, he flicked through it, making notes and sticking bookmarks when needed. A hesitant knock on the door got him out of his reverie. What do you want? He asked at a volume that would normally be considered unacceptable in any other household. His dad pushed the door open. Katsuki? It's the UA letter. He held it out. Also, your mother wants you to help with dinner. Bakugo snatched the letter from his dad. I'll be there. He was about to tear it open, then frowned. Thanks, Dad. Get the fuck out. His dad gave him a gentle smile. I know how it is, Katsuki. Exams are always stressful, even when you know you crushed them. Bakugo grunted, his dad leaving to get back to the hallway. Without hesitation, he ripped the envelope open, letting its contents fall to his desk. Bakugo glared at the metallic disc within the envelope. The hell! It flickered, displaying All Might in a god-awful yellow suit. The hero grinned at him cheerfully, Bakugo's scowl lessening. I am here as a holographic projection. You may be wondering, why am I here? Simple. His grin widened. I'm going to be teaching at UA. Bakugo stared at the projector, customary scowl completely gone and replaced with a look of wonder. All Might continued talking, gesturing. I've got a few more of these to do, so I'll try and make it quick. Young Bakugo, your score for the written exam was exemplary. Only a few other students scored higher than you on this. As for your heroics exam, you scored an impressive 77 villain points, more than enough to pass. Bakugo grinned ferociously. He'd made it in. That is, if villain points were all that there was to it. Bakugo glared at the screen. The hell? All Might seemed unperturbed. You see, young Bakugo, we weren't just looking for villain-based points. With a dramatic flourish, the screen behind him was switched on. Certainly we were checking for how well students could subdue villains one way or another, but a hero course that rejects those who do the right thing is no hero course at all. His gaze pierced Bakugo like a hot knife through butter. Think we do this for the fame and glory? Think that if you want, but in this job, you risk your life for it all. And we saw that spirit in you that day. Earlier, Bakugo was in his goddamn element. This whole exam might as well have been made for him. Die! He screamed, smashing a robot to pieces with a powerful blast from his right hand. Taking a moment to suck in a breath, he scanned the area around him. Most of the other extras had decided to keep a wide berth. As if he wasn't taking these goddamn robots down without checking his bright surroundings. Bakugo had way more control than just blindly rushing in and smashing things without keeping the shrapnel down to a minimum. A three-pointer reared up. Bakugo glared at it, his rage at the nerd proving him wrong flaring up. One quick explosion to its face later, and Bakugo was up more points. A feral grin blossomed on his face. 65 points. That had to be more than anything these extras had. A loud rumbling off in the distance attracted his attention. He spun around, eyes briefly widening at the sheer size of the zero-pointer robot that was currently unleashing destruction. Then his grin came back onto his face. A one-point robot that had locked onto him sprung an oil leak and started to run away. He tore off like a bat out of hell, ready to murder the next robot. Behind him, he heard somebody get slammed into the ground. Whipping around, Bakugo saw some guy with sharp teeth and a bad haircut pushing himself up, a three-pointer looming overhead. The robot was badly dented, but it was still going strong. Shitty Hair glared at it, ready to start again. The huge robot raised its main arm, preparing to strike. What would you do if you saw somebody in the same situation you were in? Bakugo wasn't entirely sure why he did what he did. As it focused on Shitty Hair, Bakugo came near, unleashing an explosion on the one-pointer next to it, smashing the robot to smithereens. Come get some, you fucking Roomba. The three-pointer whipped its head around. Shitty Hair took his chance, punching its head off, then looking at Bakugo with a smile and thumbs up. Thanks for the assist, Bakugo glared at him. Goddamn therapist. You'd better pass, Shitty Hair. I ain't helping you again. He stomped off, another robot in his sights crying out for its maker. Shitty Hair watched him briefly, then ran off to find more robots to punch. Hitoshi? Hitoshi was snapped out of his reverie by his mother's concerned call. Blinking, he looked up, where his parents were looking at him with worried faces. Sorry? His mother sighed. You were giving that fish a rather odd stare. Hitoshi stared at the fish for another couple of seconds, then shoveled it into his mouth, chewing. Sorry, I'm just thinking about the exam. Taking a drink of water, he saw his parents trade a glance before his dad cleared his throat. The exam results will come in today, won't they? Hitoshi managed a tired grin. Or they won't send me anything because I didn't get in. His mom shook her head disapprovingly. There's no need to have such a negative attitude, Hitoshi. She patted him on the shoulder. And if UA doesn't let you in, then there's plenty of other high schools out there with heroics courses you could apply to. Hitoshi shrugged. It seemed a bit late, especially since it was near the end of the period for applications. He debated with himself about asking Eraserhead for the results, ultimately restraining himself. As he cleared the plates, his dad went out to the hallway to check the mail. He then came back at high speeds, clutching a letter. Hitoshi, you've got it. Hitoshi took the oddly shaped package with hands that definitely weren't trembling. Before, Hitoshi stared up at the gates to UA, tiredness temporarily forgotten. It was hard to believe that it had all been leading up to this. All the harsh training and horrible puns, it was all leading to this. His Hero Academia. Hitoshi stepped forwards and managed to trip on his own shoelace. Yep, was wondering when this would happen. As the pavement rushed up to meet his face, he just resigned himself to his fate, only to be caught in the middle of the air. Blinking, Hitoshi tried to catch himself, only to slowly tumble. Panicking, he tried to get back onto stable ground, only to be interrupted by a girl's voice behind him. Are you okay? Hitoshi twisted around to see who was talking to him. A girl with brown hair done neatly in a bob stood there cheerfully. Gently she reached out and pulled him down to the ground. Sorry for using my quirk on you like that, she beamed at Hitoshi. It's just a bad omen to trip and fall. Hitoshi managed to recover. Thanks for catching me. Nice girl chuckled. Not a problem. Man, this is nerve-wracking, isn't it? He managed to chuckle back. Yeah, sure is. He trailed off, not sure what to say next. He couldn't even think of a horrible joke. She gave him another smile, then hurried off. Good luck. Hitoshi managed to get a smile on his face. After constant exposure to Eraserhead's smiles, it looked like he had just arisen from the grave. You too. He blinked, replaying what had just happened in his mind. He'd managed to talk to a girl that wasn't Miss Joke. Progress. Later, Hitoshi stared at All Might's projected visage, tiredness forgotten. Young Shinso, your written portion was extremely solid. You just need to brush up a bit on your mathematics and history. As for your heroics exam, you scored 24 villain points. Hitoshi blinked. He must have gotten some other points during that last mad rush somehow. All Might frowned slightly, and Shinso immediately tensed. This score, unfortunately, was below the threshold for the practical exam. Your effort is appreciated, but not being able to secure enough points means that you failed. Hitoshi felt a pit open in his stomach. He'd really hoped that he wouldn't hear those words. After everything Eraserhead had done for him, that is, if that was all there was to the exam. Hitoshi stared up at All Might's visage. What? All Might's trademark smile returned. Whipping a remote out of his pocket, he turned on the screen behind him. Confused? Maybe this scene'll clear things up for you. Hitoshi twisted the hem of his shirt anxiously. The camera zoomed in. Earlier, Hitoshi sucked in a deep breath. He'd managed to take out a fair number of robots already. 20 points, he panted, already looking for the next robot to beat up. The nice girl from before seemed to be doing well, at least. Surrounded by broken robots falling from the sky, she bent over, taking a deep breath. He'd seen a couple of other people doing a good job as well. That blonde girl with glasses who'd looked nervous had managed to get a couple of robots in a frankly ridiculous display of power, though judging by her expression and the wrecked glove on her hand, she'd not been doing as well as she could have. He'd really wanted to use his quirk for this exam. Hitoshi had been careful about it, having checked with the blonde French one to see if it would work. The robot declaring that examinee whatever, not him, had earned the points, had dissuaded him from trying again. The only way his quirk would have helped was if he intentionally sabotaged other competitors, and that was both a dick move and explicitly not allowed in the rules. Hitoshi saw another one-pointer robot coming at him. As the robot came at him, he ducked and rolled, then cracked his staff over its head, smashing its robotic head in. One more down. Wud. The ground shook. For a brief moment, Hitoshi thought that UA was suffering from an earthquake. Then it shook again, like the footfall of a giant. As a shadow passed overhead, Hitoshi stared up at the zero-pointer, all his tiredness forgotten. That is way too big, he muttered, already getting the hell out of Dodge. The rest of the examinees had the same idea, including the guy who'd interrupted at the exam. Hitoshi ran, already focusing on the terrain ahead of him. Hitoshi stopped, whipping around at the sound, so loud over all of the chaos. The nice girl, he hadn't caught her name, had collapsed. She'd tripped, of all things, one leg buried beneath some rubble. Hitoshi was too far away to get to her. His eyes widened. He wasn't really thinking with his next move. Hey! He yelled at the big guy with glasses. Do you want to be a hero? The annoying guy from before turned around in the middle of running. Of course. Shinso felt his quirk connect, the glasses guy's eyes glazing over. Carry me over to her, quickly. Blank-eyed, Glasses rushed over, grabbing him in a princess carry of all things. Shinso barely held on as he was rushed over. Melissa distractedly unwound the tough red strip of material that she had been working on. This was the right approach to take. She knew that much. Tough enough to withstand the full force of Uncle Might's, her quirk, yet lightweight and flexible. It worked, but she found that improving its durability was taking longer than she would have liked. She really should have applied to other heroics courses, but with everything else, there just hadn't been time. The lab room wasn't an impressive affair, just a spare room filled with tools and parts. Her computer chimed, the secure line to Island and her father lighting up. Shoving her work aside for now, she answered, managing to put a smile on her face. Hey, Dad. Melissa? Her dad looked at Melissa with a worried expression. How have you been holding up? I know you didn't get many points, but there's always. Melissa sighed. I'm fine. It's just, I can't help but feel like I let Uncle Mite down a bit. The prototype full gauntlet had helped her, but the lack of proper preparation time for her inventions meant that they could only withstand the full force of her quirk once. After that, they'd been useless. After the exam, she'd needed Recovery Girl's help, and all for 5 lousy points. Uncle Mite had been unable to tell her anything, citing his being a prospective teacher and judge. She would have preferred to hear that she'd failed then. Dad looked away slightly. I understand. You know that Toshi'd never think any less of anybody. That made Melissa smile, in spite of her funk. I know, but it's still, she glanced down at her hand. Even now, she could feel one for all in her body, a massive reservoir of power that strained to be unleashed. I haven't seen much of him in the past week. The door to her lab opened, Mirio standing there with a cheerful smile. Melissa, the letter from UA is here. Earlier, in the rising sun, Toshinori Yagi stared at the beach, spotless. You cleaned not just the assigned area, but the whole beach. Melissa turned around to her adoptive uncle, panting. She'd insisted on stepping up the training, aiming to not just be enough, but to be better. Yagi had agreed to intensify it, even adding a bit of hand-to-hand combat on the advice of Sir Night-Eye. He'd attempted to emulate an extremely mild Gran Torino with only mild violent tendencies. You've exceeded my expectations. Oh my, goodness! Next to him, Sir Night-Eye sighed. It's certainly a sight. He checked his watch, and just in time, too. Melissa gave them a cheerful smile, swaying in a battered but triumphant way. Told you, I could do it. Yagi gave her a reassuring smile. He reached up to pull a hair from his head. Melissa, just remember this. This power, you've earned it. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a specific photo. Don't believe me? This is you about 8 months ago. The photo showed Melissa, shaky and slightly nervous. And this is you now, Melissa blinked, checking the difference. She'd gone from merely physically fit to looking like she could throw a grown man. Wow. Sir Night-Eye gave Melissa a congratulatory smile. I have to admit, I've often wondered about this day. His gaze shifted slightly, into the gaze of a fan meeting their idol. I have written a large number of speculative documents about One for All, ever since I heard of its transferability. Melissa gave him an odd look. The stoic man didn't meet her eyes. Shrugging and with a determined expression, she grinned. All right, Uncle Mite, I'm ready. Yagi held out the hair. Eat this. Melissa's determined smile slipped. Yagi awkwardly rubbed the back of his head. Look, you just need something with my DNA in it. Sir Night-Eye looked mortified. I'd expected something different, like a ray of light. Yagi rubbed his chin. Well, my master gave me the hair. Apparently the predecessors usually had to give their successors blood, since there was usually a lot of it outside of their body. He frowned. I could work up a real sweat and soak something with it, or I could give you some skin. Melissa tore the hair out of his grasp. I'll take the hair. At the exam. Melissa swallowed, nervously stretching. The exam briefing had been interesting. She'd felt a bit bad when Present Mike had tried to get everybody to yell out with him. Seeing the other student with glasses stand up and ask a question that was probably going to get answered shortly anyway was also a bit awkward. Her greatest worry was that she had a quirk that she had never used in her life. She didn't feel any different. Melissa's jumpsuit was a dark burgundy color, co-designed by her father for sweat wicking and general resilience. Problem was, it was just a little tight, hugging her figure a bit more than anticipated. She'd seen a rather short student with purple balls for hair get distracted and run into a wall while staring at her. Could she do this? The support gear she'd designed for herself in her free time was currently stored in a fanny pack. Ever since Uncle Mite had explained about the risk of her limbs exploding if not properly prepared, she'd used the few tools and resources she'd been able to take from Island to Japan to finish a project she'd had on the back burner. She wrapped her hands nervously with her invention, trying to relax. She'd done as much testing of this gear as was possible, and she was reasonably confident it could withstand the full force of Uncle Mite's blows. At least once, maybe twice. Uncle Mite's words from earlier rang in her head. Despite you being a proper vessel, you were made hastily, very hastily, so expect serious kickback. Uncle Mite gave her a cheery thumbs up as she tried to get the taste of hair out of her mouth. While there's no time for a detailed explanation, just remember to use the power, clench your butt cheeks, and yell "smash" from the bottom of your heart. Melissa sighed. She loved her uncle. She really did. But she got the feeling there had to be more to One for All than that. To try and distract herself, she looked at the other attendees. There was a pretty diverse bunch of people, one of the most striking being a lanky teenager with a shock of purple hair walking over to another student. Her inventor's mind idly scanned each person's gear. Let's see. Cooling device for the legs, regulatory device on the stomach, some sort of battery for an electricity quirk. Why are you here? Trying to interfere with another student? Melissa started slightly. The tall boy from before had gripped the shoulder of the purple-haired student. The other boy had what looked like a quarterstaff. Melissa wondered if he had some sort of strength quirk if he was so confident. Or maybe an impact-increasing quirk that only worked on inanimate objects. For his part, the purple-haired student gave him a corpse-like grin, tired eyes shining with some small malice. I just wanted to talk to somebody who helped me out earlier, and with how loud you're being as well as that question to present Mike, his leer widened. Aren't you disrupting other students more than me? The other boy recoiled as if burnt. His face was a picture of misery. Well, that's not what I... All right, begin. Everybody stood around for a couple of seconds in shock, the tall teenager with purple hair immediately bolting while getting his staff ready. Present Mike gave the rest of the examinees a huge grin. Looks like examinee 4135's got the right idea. Clock's ticking. That got everybody's attention, the rest of them scrambling to get out and into the huge model city. Melissa blinked, then took off running. She was already lagging behind everybody concerning her ability to use her new quirk. Yagi bowed to the teachers in the room politely. Yagi Toshinori, it's an honor to be here. Eraserhead sighed. Let's get this exam over with. The screens in the room lit up, displaying various parts of the cities as well as the perspective of the robots themselves. Yagi sat down, fidgeting in his newly bought yellow pinstripe suit. Sir Night-Eye had tried to talk him out of it, but Yagi was going to wear whatever stylish clothes he wanted. Damn it. I have some idea of how the exam is structured, but could you? Cementos nodded. Well, we don't tell them how many robots there are or where they're situated. Ectoplasm hummed, a duplicate examining a screen. Truth be told, we switch up the exams every so often. Last year, we set up a treasure hunt in a forest locale. Yagi hummed, digesting it. On the screens, he could see everything happening. A purple-haired boy with a staff caving in a robotic skull. A boy with engineers in his legs, and Ida most likely, smashing through scores of robots. So the exam is checking for all the strengths in hero work, those heroes who excel at gathering information, mobility experts, decision-making. And a disproportionate number of those brawlers your style popularizes, Eraserhead cut in. Yagi wilted. Well. His heart leapt into his chest when he saw Melissa manage to smash a couple of robots and a large portion of the area around her. There was a small tremor from the direction she was testing in. Yagi winced as he saw Melissa's mortified expression, trying to apologize to those who had nearly gotten caught in the massive crater left by One for All. In the crater was a huge pile of wrecked electronics. The room was silent for a few seconds. Then everybody was clamoring. Did you see that? Not much finesse, but in terms of raw power. It looks like that wraps on her arm took too much force. It's like she barely has any control over her quirk. Nedzu, for his part, just grinned. He shot Yagi a knowing look. One of the things he took pleasure in was just how much more he knew than other people. Yagi winced, trying to hide his anxiety. Good or bad, Melissa had certainly made an impression. Melissa winced, looking at the wraps on her arm. A grin broke out on her face, in spite of the embarrassment of the situation. There was still a slight stinging sensation from using so much power, but at least her arm wasn't broken. It had worked. Then the wrap fell apart. Melissa's shaky smile faltered. She had felt the power of One for All if her arm hadn't been protected, and she hadn't been able to make wraps for her legs in time. She only had one arm to work with, and she'd only managed to get 5 points. To make things worse, the other examinees had decided to stay away from her. meaning that the robots would get drawn away unless she could compensate. Melissa ran forwards, searching for more robots to break. The teacher's room had managed to quiet down after that display. A couple of teachers were still quite excited about developments. Well, there's certainly a bumper crop of youthful energy in these examinees, Midnight purred. Nobody else commented on the specific language. Some were more cynical about it. If she can't control that quirk of hers, then there would be no place for her here, Eraserhead grumbled. Yagi shot him a dirty look. If only they'd had more time, he could have taught her how to control it better. Since it'd come so easily to him, he just assumed it would be so easy for Melissa as well. Nedzu simply grinned. Well, Yagi, they seem to have had enough time to adjust, haven't they? His grin became predatory. He leaned in next to Yagi, who shivered. The principal gestured over to a big red button. Yagi, would you like to test their mettle? On the holographic display, she could tell Uncle Mite was holding something back, despite his smile. Well, Melissa, while your written exam was excellent, in the practical exam, you are only able to score 5 points, though the method of earning those points was impressive. If you fail the practical exam, then you cannot make it into the heroics course. Melissa sat there, staring at the wrecked remains of the prototype full gauntlet. Even though she'd known it would happen, she still felt like she'd let Uncle Mite down. Maybe this was his way of telling her that she shouldn't have gotten her hopes up. She could feel tears building in the corners of her eyes. But there was more to the exam than met the eye. Melissa stared at the display behind Uncle Mite's projection, standing there, one after the other, all students she'd seen. Melissa, they all came after the exams were over. Seems you made an impression. The first to speak was the girl with brown hair. Excuse me? She twisted the hem of her jumper. You know that blonde girl with the glasses? Well, can you give her some of the points I earned? Melissa couldn't help but stare. The girl continued talking. It's just, I heard her saying, just a few more points. So, could you give her some of mine? At least as many as she could have gotten if she hadn't needed to save me. The camera switched to one of the other boys there, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, rubbed the back of his neck. Honestly, I put other people at risk, and I don't think I really deserve to be here. She saved us. The last one was extremely short, with purple balls for hair. He looked like he was still freaking out about what had happened. I'd like to get in, but if she hadn't destroyed that huge robot, then I wouldn't be here. And I kind of feel bad for staring at her butt. Melissa couldn't help but tear up. While she didn't remember the other, much shorter boy being there, and would have preferred if he hadn't been perving on her, she definitely remembered those two. Earlier, Uraraka blinked as the purple-haired boy and the burly glasses guy rushed back, coming to as quick a stop as they could. What? Shakili, the lanky boy, managed to pull himself out of the glasses guy's arms and ran over to her, shoving the rock on her leg off as carefully as he could. Can you stand? Uraraka shook her head. I think I twisted my ankle. He swore under his breath. Right. He turned to the other person who was standing there with a blank look on his face. A guilty look crossed over his own. Then he closed his eyes. Glasses stumbled, as if he was just waking up. He looked around. What? Uraraka blinked as the purple-haired student pulled her onto his shoulder. Sorry, but could you give me a hand? We've got to. Even as Glasses ran over, Uraraka could tell it was going to be too late. Shakily, she turned to look at the colossal zero-pointer. Purple hair cursed, shooting a glance over at Glasses. I'm sorry I roped you into this. They tried to get away, Glasses' student looking at him oddly. I don't know what I'm doing here. You asked me if I wanted to be a hero. The zero-pointer raised its massive fist, ready to smash the puny meatbags below it into paste. Once again, Melissa found that she was moving without thinking. Before she knew what had happened, she was flying through the air like a shooting star aimed at its face. She cocked her left arm back, its full gauntlet primed and ready. Despite how she felt about the advice, she clenched tight, and from the bottom of her heart cried out, "Smash!" Her fist made contact with its face, the cyclopean robot falling to pieces from the point of impact. She stared at the robot as it fell backwards, bringing down 2 simulated skyscrapers along the way. For a second, she hung there. Then gravity picked up its jaw from the floor and pulled her down. Not just that, but her adrenaline wore off, and then there was pain. Looking behind her, she winced as she saw her legs flapping in the wind, like a pair of raw strips of bacon in front of a fan. Gritting her teeth, she stared at the ground. All right, I've got 2 arms to work with. I'll have to use another attack like that to cancel out the impact. I'll only have 2 shots, but I need to only make 1. The ground rushed closer. Melissa's glasses had nearly fallen off, only the hasty modifications she'd made to them allowing them to stay on. She frowned, trying to calculate the optimal angle to launch her attack. Slap! Only for the brown-haired girl to slap her in the face, causing her to stop falling at terminal velocity, instead floating down like a fallen leaf. Below, the purple-haired student watched, then caught her R-release. The brown-haired nice girl managed to float back down on the piece of broken robot she'd rode. Then her eyes crossed, her hands flying to her mouth before... Blurg! The student holding Melissa up winced as his friend vomited. Tired eyes stared at her. Are you all right? Melissa winced, then she remembered. I just need 1 more point. And it's all over! Melissa's face fell. She'd blown it. In 3 different rooms, All Might said the same thing. This is your Hero Academia. There were tears, there were cheers. In Bakugo's case, there were explosions. In another room, the response was given by Power Loader to a group of young hopefuls. This is your support academia. In those rooms, there were tears of joy and some tears of remorse and regret. There was more cheering and a young man going over to see his friend about their results. Hatsume Mei's room exploded for reasons unrelated to her passing. But in one room, the response was different. All Might gave a solemn frown. Minoru Moneta, despite giving it your all, you were unfortunately just below the cutoff point for entering the hero course. However, you are more than qualified to join the general education course if you so desire. Moneta stared down at himself. Did his best? Not really. All he'd really done was perv on the admittedly attractive girl who'd saved his ass. By the time he'd gotten his head in the game, it was too late. Hopefully she'd been given his points. She'd need them more than him. Still, kind of hurt. Moneta sighed. Then he perked up, a half-forgotten factoid about UA coming to mind. There was a thing with the sports festival. A plan in mind, Moneta smiled. This time, he wouldn't fuck up. He wasn't going to get distracted by hot babes. Chapter endnotes. Anne. Surprised? I know I am. Despite restructuring this and rewriting parts, this all came really quickly. I hope it was more interesting than the usual heroics exam. Some things stay the same with different actors. Some things change. Either way, I hope this was enjoyable. These were scenes that I plotted out a couple of months' final scores if interested. Bakugo, 77 villain points, 10 rescue points. Shinso, 24 villain points, 20 rescue points, changed due to criticism. Points more reflect putting others in danger, not successful rescue. Melissa, 5 villain points, 65 rescue points. Next time will be a short time away. I'll write some side stories and prepare something for you maggots. Don't forget to comment. I need those comments, man. I can quit anytime I like. Chapter Notes Interlude. Public Response. See the end of the chapter for notes. If you checked the internet and TV during those early days of Mastermind's criminal rampage, you might be interested to see how people had reacted to Mastermind's sudden appearance. There were a whole host of reactions, ranging from curious and excited to bored and apathetic. Let's look at some of the more interesting ones. HeroTube video, new villain saves teenager. Weird to see a villain like that guy. So nobody was able to catch this guy, and he's already robbed a support building? Acid Alien. Sure, he's a villain, but he seems fun. HeroTube video, gentle criminal and loyal subscriber team up bank heist. Comments, fake and gay. How are you everywhere, dude? Unreal. Show La Brava Feet official criminal channel. Reported, please stop asking for pictures of La Brava's feet. All Might true hero. These fake heroes need to be taught a lesson. It's because of moral degradation like this that society is such a sham. Dude, your mom is a sham. Destrite. This is just a disgrace. These villains were outnumbered, and yet they got away with all that money. Why didn't anybody in the bank use their quirk to try and fight them? Stuff like this is why we need to get rid of these stupid quirk restrictions. It's just a part of your body. Don't be afraid. Are you crazy? Quirks are going to be the death of us all. If you think about it, quirks keep getting stronger and stronger, and we encourage this to happen. The definition of human just keeps changing. What's to stop the singularity? Nothing. But if we can just rid ourselves of quirks, then we can set the world back on a better path and avert the end. Are you out of your mind? Can't believe you believe in the singularity theory, which has never been proven to be a thing. One HeroTube video, League of Supervillains debut. From the League of Supervillains official HeroTube channel. Comments. Some guy with a goatee. I can't believe that they just made a HeroTube channel. I thought that Mastermind was just going to continue doing his thing on Gentle Criminals. Seriously, how are you everywhere? What concerns me the most about this is the sheer volume of villains that have joined him. The villain named Mr. Warp has what seems to be a smoke-based warping quirk. He has also teamed up with a laser-emitting villain and an incredibly strong heteromorphic rabbit villain. Combined with Gentle Criminal and the new support technology he is displaying, their threat level has escalated considerably. Samp, God, I want Bunny Villain to crush my head with her thighs. Copy. Wow, that guy who fought the short villain got beat hard, LMAO. All Might True Hero. These fake heroes have done enough to embarrass themselves. Somebody needs to deal with them. League of Supervillains Walk on Grass. From the League of Supervillains official HeroTube channel. Comments. Some guy with a goatee. Mastermind went to all this effort just to walk on some grass. Wow. Longfinger. Oh shit. I think. Know that guy. Okay, we just don't say anything about this. He will literally kill us. Dark Knight. What a mad banquet of darkness. Odd Eye is truly an impressive hero. He's so devoted to the inner darkness. Merging, agreed. That's so accurate, though. Mad banquet of darkness. Great turn of phrase. And Mastermind MV, when you're evil. Acid Alien. Comments. Some guy with a goatee. Should we really be mocking a villain like this? Especially a villain who has a HeroTube account? Whatever, it's not like he's going to see it. League of Supervillains official channel. Oh wow, this is pretty good. I've got to show the rest of the league. Not Night Eye. Do not engage with the League of Supervillains. Whatever else they are criminals who have caused millions of yen of property damage and robberies. Their ostensible good deeds do not gloss over the real harm they have caused. Don't listen to him, Mastermind. Punkjacks. Nice music pairing. Really fits his whole I'm definitely a villain and not a goober deal. Wahaha, you've been masterminded. That's not how the meme works, dude. HeroTube comments are all well and good. Let's see some actual reactions. After all, those are more interesting. Uraraka Suma sighed, glancing at the accounts again. Uraraka Construction was once again in the red. They'd been trying to get more building jobs, yet they kept getting contracts snatched out from under them. Rubbing the bridge of his nose, he cracked his knuckles, getting ready to start again. The door to the study burst in. Startled, Suma whirled around to see his wife Akiko standing there, phone outstretched. Suma, just look at this. Honey, what are you? Read it. Slightly confused, Suma took the phone, looking at the article displayed. His eyes widened. Hiroyama corruption case. Huge damages revealed after mastermind attack. He blinked. What? He furiously scrolled through the rest of the article. Yesterday, the Hiroyama Construction Company was attacked by the League of Supervillains in an unprecedented attack. The villains infiltrated the company's main office using some sort of hacking device, gaining access to the mainframe. After stealing a large amount of raw materials and money, the villains were narrowly able to escape the heroes and police. Further investigations, as well as evidence left behind by the villains, revealed that Hiroyama Construction had in fact been engaged in considerable criminal activity. With shoddy materials, overcharging, and pension funds being directly sent overseas to an offshore bank account, The Hiroyama Construction Company is in deep trouble, with existing contracts currently being dissolved by customers. Suma tore his eyes from the screen to lock his gaze with his wife's, both of their eyes wide. Then his phone buzzed. With shaking hands, he picked it up. Hello, yes, this is Uraraka Construction, building with a smile. How can I… What? Hurriedly, he picked up a pencil. You want to have a block of apartments built? I mean, sure we can do it. You're coming here to talk? Today? Well, I'll see you this afternoon. Hashing out the details, he slapped his phone back on the table, where it buzzed again. Suma and Akiko traded a glance. Then, with a huge grin on his face, Suma picked up his phone while Akiko shot over to her computer. They were never going to officially thank Mastermind for the windfall, but the League of Supervillains channel gained a couple of new subscribers. Sayu Mayumi half-turned her head when she heard Mei kick the door in and run up to her. Ever since their first meeting in kindergarten, she'd been used to Mei's invention showcases. Aha! This beautiful baby's almost complete. A gauntlet was shoved in her face, Mei's excited grin appearing a second later. What do you think, Mayumi? Huh? Pushing herself up, Mayumi looked at it closer. So, what is it? Mei grinned. It's not much yet, but with some better tech, it will be amazing. This baby is designed to absorb kinetic energy by using spring power, then release it when ready. Mayumi checked over the construction. That's really impressive, Mei. We didn't blow the school lab up for this, did we? Mei grinned. It was a close thing. Mayumi paused as she heard the newsreader start to talk about the latest information. And we have an attack by a group calling themselves the League of Supervillains, apparently created by Mastermind. This group has… Mei grimaced. Mastermind. Mayumi shuffled up slightly so that Mei could sit down. I really don't get why you don't like him. The guy's covered in support gear. Mei scooted next to her friend. Yeah, exactly. All those beautiful babies, and he's using them like this. What's worse, if I make something that he's done, I'll look like a copycat. You could just say it was inspiration. The TV played footage of Mastermind blocking a massive overhead attack, then planting his palms on the hero who had made it. Tooing. Mayumi winced as the hero was sent flying back. Damn, that's rough. Didn't know Mastermind had an impact quirk, eh, Mei? When her friend didn't respond, she frowned. Mei? Mei was staring at the screen, her mouth open. Her cross-haired eyes zoomed in on the picture. My baby. Mayumi had never heard that dead tone on her friend's voice before. That's my baby. Mayumi edged closer to Mei. Seriously, are you? He has stolen my baby. Defiled it. You could not have put more venom into the phrase child murderer. She started to shake with rage. Mayumi took one glance at her friend's face and decided that it would be best to get out of the way. As she hastily left the room, she saw Mei glare at the sky, hands outstretched in rage. Damn you, Mastermind! In a large office that was dimly lit, a meeting was definitely not taking place. There were no people here, as they were tied up elsewhere, doing other things. There was no quiet discussion about the projected image of a green and red figure. Nobody asked, so should we keep him at his current designation? Nobody replied. Unfortunately, per regulations put in place, it would be difficult to justify. Another person, who couldn't have been there, did not say, the League of Supervillains has caused a lot of damage. It would be sensible to tally it up and see if it would exceed the threshold. A suited figure didn't shake their head in response. That would open up channels for other complaints about villain designation. It would disrupt the public too much. Nobody said, true. It's a useful way to keep certain heroes out of higher rankings. Somebody did say, if we still had her, we wouldn't have this problem. The chair at the head of the table sighed. My predecessor, unfortunately, encouraged rather more brutal solutions to problems, and severely underestimated her character. A seated person did not laugh. He certainly did. We have changed our approach to such problems considerably, the head chair did not say. The people in the room didn't look at the image. Pros and cons were not debated. For now, it would be best if he continued, was the consensus. He has inadvertently helped deal with troublesome elements, somebody who wasn't there commented. If the heroes cannot deal with it, then we will step in. The chair did not nod. For the greater good. The greater good. Chapter End Notes. Ewu, A bit of a disjointed side story, but I liked it. It took a bit longer than I would have liked. I decided to play with it a bit and am not entirely satisfied. Please comment. Link in the description. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment in the comment section if you want me to